been lied to about self-worth. They told you it comes from being perfect, from fixing every flaw, from always getting it right. But if that were true, why do you still feel like you're not enough? Why do your thoughts race at night, repeating the same old doubts, the same old shame? Why does it hurt to be alone with your own mind? The truth is, self-judgment doesn't come from being broken. It comes from believing you shouldn't be. And that belief? It's the real prison. But there's a way out, not by becoming better, not by healing faster, but by letting go of the voice that says you have to be anything more than you already are. Tonight, as you fall asleep, you'll learn a powerful truth the ancient teachers once knew. When you stop clinging to the idea of who you think you should be, you finally meet the peace of who you are. Calm, whole, already enough. This isn't just another bedtime audio. This is the end of the fight inside. This is the night you stop judging and start resting. This is what your soul has been waiting for. Are you ready to be free? Let's begin. You've tried silencing it. You've tried ignoring it. You've even tried fighting it with force. But it keeps returning. The voice inside that picks you apart piece by piece. It's quiet when you're busy, loud when you're still. You lie in bed, and there it is again, pointing fingers, making you feel less than, measuring your worth against a scale you never agreed to. There is a reason it keeps speaking, and there is a reason you keep listening. What if the voice you call cruel was once trying to protect you? What if judgment didn't begin as punishment, but as a way to survive? What if you could see it clearly now, not as your identity, not as your truth, but as a mental habit rooted in fear, clinging, and misunderstanding? The teachings of the Buddha remind us suffering begins in the mind, and so does liberation. What we hold tightly, what we identify with, what we mistake as self, these illusions are the causes of our restlessness. The inner critic is not your enemy. It is simply the mind, confused and trying to find safety in a world it doesn't yet understand. In early life, praise and rejection shaped how you saw yourself. Approval meant safety. Disapproval felt like exile. Long before you knew the word for shame, you felt its sting. This conditioning didn't begin with logic. It began with sensation, tension in the chest, heat in the face, tightness in the gut. These were the first signals that something was wrong, and the mind, being alert and eager to protect, recorded those moments like a cautious scribe. Each failure, each frown, each moment of being scolded or laughed at became a memory. But more than that, it became a map. A map of what to avoid, what to fix, what to hide. Over time, this map became your guide. It whispered, "Don't speak too loudly, they won't like it. Don't try that, you'll embarrass yourself. Don't rest, you haven't earned it." These thoughts were not born from malice. They were shaped by the fear of not belonging. And in Buddhist teaching, fear is one of the deepest forms of clinging. We cling to control, to safety, to certainty, even if that means clinging to the harsh voice in our heads. Because that voice feels familiar. It gives us rules. It pretends to protect us, but it never brings peace. The inner critic is a product of dukkha, the unease, the stress, the suffering that arises from grasping. It measures everything. It categorizes everything. It separates the self into good and bad, worthy and unworthy, spiritual and broken. But this is illusion. The self, as taught by the Buddha, is not fixed. It is empty of inherent nature. What we call I is simply conditions coming together. Thoughts, sensations, memories, habits, all arising and passing away. So when the inner critic says, "You are not enough," it is clinging to a false identity, a bundle of memories mistaken for a permanent self. The more we believe it, the more we suffer. Not because the voice is true, but because we grasp at it. We take it personally. We defend against it or collapse under it. And yet, none of that is necessary. The practice begins not in changing the voice, but in seeing it, noticing its tone, its timing, its texture. When does it arise? What does it fear? What does it try to control? In mindfulness, we do not resist the voice. We allow it to be seen. With awareness, it loses power. Not because we suppress it, but because we stop feeding it. Thoughts need energy. They need belief to stay alive. But awareness is like space. It does not cling. It does not judge. It simply allows. And in that allowing, something shifts. We begin to notice the pattern. The voice arises most when we feel exposed, uncertain, vulnerable. It tries to fix discomfort by pointing out flaws, but discomfort does not need fixing. It needs compassion. Compassion is not pity. It is the direct recognition that suffering is present and the willingness to meet it with tenderness. The Buddha taught that when we meet suffering with aversion, we double it. But when we meet it with mindfulness, we create the conditions for peace. When you hear the inner critic say, "You failed again," you can pause and say, suffering is here. Just that. A gentle acknowledgement. No drama, no resistance. This is wise seeing, the kind that pierces through illusion, the kind that recognizes thoughts as just thoughts, sound, energy, passing clouds in a vast sky. And that vast sky? That's your true nature. Spacious, unbound, not defined by any one thought or feeling. As we deepen into this practice, something profound happens. We no longer rush to fix ourselves. We stop believing that worth comes from perfection. We begin to rest in equanimity, the calm balance that arises when we no longer cling to praise or shrink from blame. This balance is not cold. It's not indifference. It's a warm, grounded clarity. A stillness that sees all things as they are, without needing them to be different. In this space, the voice of the inner critic softens. It may still arise, but it no longer hooks you. You may hear it say, "You should have done more today," and you simply breathe. Smile. You don't argue. You don't collapse. You just see it, and it passes. And slowly, a new habit is formed, one based not on fear, but on presence. Presence reveals that you are not broken, you are not behind, you are not less than anyone. These ideas are rooted in comparison, and comparison is just another form of clinging. It clings to status, to image, to identity. But all of these are impermanent. They arise, they fade. Nothing you hold on to lasts. This truth is not meant to frighten you. It's meant to free you. Because if nothing lasts, then no label can define you. Not your failures, not your doubts, not the voice that says you're unworthy. All of it is wind. All of it can pass. What remains is your awareness, your presence, your capacity to love, even when the mind is noisy. The teachings point us toward non-identification. This is not about denying experience, but about not mistaking experience for identity. The critic says, "You are lazy," but mindfulness says, "A thought about laziness is arising." The critic says, "You're a failure," but mindfulness says, "Judgment is here." The shift is subtle but powerful. One keeps you trapped, the other sets you free. This freedom doesn't require perfection. It requires patience. It requires the willingness to return again and again to the present moment, because the present is the only place the critic can be met and understood. In the past, it was formed. In the future, it speculates. But only now can it be seen clearly. And when it is seen clearly, it begins to unravel, because clarity dissolves confusion, just as light dissolves shadow. The Buddha did not teach self-esteem. He taught no self, not as a negation, but as a liberation. The recognition that we are not the fixed stories we tell about ourselves, not the roles we play, not the thoughts we think. This doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it spacious, open, kind. In that space, you begin to choose differently, not from fear, but from love. You may still strive, but no longer to prove your worth. You may still grow, but not because you believe you're inadequate. You grow because it's your nature to unfold, like a flower naturally reaching toward the light, not to impress anyone, but because it's what it was made to do. And when you stumble, as you will, the voice may return. But now you meet it not with fear, not with shame, but with a gentle bow. "Ah, here you are again. I see you, and I will not abandon myself this time." This is the real transformation, not erasing the critic, but creating space around it. A soft field of awareness that holds everything without needing to control it. You are no longer at war with your mind. You are no longer trying to escape what's uncomfortable. You are present. You are still. And in that stillness, you hear something deeper. Not the critic, not even the praise, but the quiet truth beneath it all. You are already free. And tonight, you rest in that freedom. You let go of the voice that says you're not enough. You breathe in kindness. You breathe out tension. And you allow everything to be as it is, because nothing needs to be fixed, only understood, only held, only loved. This is the end of judgment. This is the beginning of peace. And so the voice softened, no longer sharp, no longer heavy, just a passing breeze in the vast field of your awareness. In seeing the critic for what it is, just a survival habit rooted in fear, you stepped into stillness. The tension started to loosen, but still something lingers, a shape in the silence. Not harsh this time, but quiet, polite, often praised, still powerful. It doesn't scream, it whispers, "Be good, do better, don't disappoint." That pressure doesn't come from punishment, it comes from approval. Praise, when misunderstood, becomes its own prison. At first it felt warm, a smile, a kind word, the sense of being seen. When you did well, whether it was in school, at home, or among others, you were noticed, encouraged, rewarded. It felt like love. But soon, that reward became something else, something heavier, Not just encouragement, but expectation. Not just joy, but pressure. And before you could understand what was happening, your nervous system formed a connection. To be loved, you must be good. Not just sometimes, always. This early pattern often hides in plain sight. It looks like discipline. It sounds like motivation. But underneath it is a fragile contract. Be perfect or lose connection. Be impressive or feel invisible. Be agreeable or feel unsafe. So you learned to shape yourself accordingly, to study harder, to say the right things, to anticipate needs before they were spoken. And every time you were praised for this, the conditioning deepened. The identity of the good one began to take root. In Buddhist teachings, clinging to identity is one of the deepest causes of suffering. When you believe you must be someone in order to be worthy, you are trapped by the illusion of self. A role, a story, a concept. And every moment becomes an attempt to maintain that image. Early praise often locks this image in place. It creates an internal scorekeeper, not one that scolds, but one that monitors. Every move, every tone of voice, every facial expression. This inner judge isn't loud, but it is relentless. It wants to get everything right. It fears being misunderstood. It scans for how others are reacting, not because it's self-obsessed, but because it was trained to survive by pleasing. As a child, being good became the path to safety. So any deviation felt dangerous. Making a mistake wasn't just a mistake, it was a threat to belonging. Disagreeing wasn't just about opinion, it risked love. And over time, this shaped the entire structure of your mind. You may have become the one who helped everyone, but couldn't ask for help. The one who smiled through pain, the one who held back tears in case they were too much. In the Dharma, this is called suffering from attachment to form, mistaking the temporary for the true, a smile that hides sadness, an achievement that masks emptiness. The outer appearance is praised, but the inner experience is ignored, and so the self becomes split, a public face and a hidden ache. Even now you may notice it. The subtle panic when you fall short, the guilt when you rest, the tension when someone is disappointed. These reactions are not faults. They are echoes of early praise that taught you to base your value on performance. Conditional love creates a conditional self. When the message is, you are loved because you're good, then you must keep being good to feel safe. But good is rarely defined clearly. It changes depending on mood, culture, moment. So you stay alert. You scan, you adjust, you contort, you become skilled in reading the room, but forget how to read yourself. This is not a moral failure, it's trauma. The trauma of not knowing if your worth will remain when you are simply you. This creates chronic self-judgment. Not because you think you're bad, but because you fear not being good enough. There is always a higher standard, a new goal, a way to be more helpful, more spiritual, more kind. Even growth becomes a way to prove your worth. Even healing becomes performance. In Buddhist practice, this is the subtle trap of attachment to virtue, wanting to be seen as right or pure or awake. But any identity, no matter how noble, is still clinging. The awakened heart is not concerned with being perceived a certain way. It is only concerned with freedom. Freedom means letting go of the image. Freedom means resting in the truth that who you are without trying is already whole. But this takes deep undoing. The good kid identity is not easy to release. It feels safe, familiar, but it costs too much. It costs your spontaneity, your honesty, your softness. It costs your ability to say no, your ability to say, I don't know. It costs your ability to be human without shame. One of the most powerful tools for dissolving this identity is honest self-reflection without seeking improvement. Sitting quietly with yourself, not to find what's wrong, not to fix, but simply to witness, to hear your own thoughts and stay, to feel sadness arise and not justify it, to allow anger without guilt. This is not indulgence. It is truth-telling, the kind of truth that leads to peace. The teachings remind us that peace is not found in being good. Peace is found in being free from the need to be good. And paradoxically, this freedom opens the heart in ways that perfection never can. Because when love is no longer something to earn, it becomes something to give. First to yourself, then to others. To begin this shift, it helps to notice when praise begins to control you. Do you feel lighter or more anxious when someone compliments you? Do you feel relaxed or pressured when you're told you did well? Is your joy rooted in the moment or in how you're being perceived? This inquiry is gentle, no shame, just observation. Because observation brings awareness, and awareness brings choice. When you see the pattern clearly, you are no longer in its grip. You can thank the voice that wants to protect you, but you do not have to obey it. You can notice the part of you that wants to be seen as good, and still choose honesty over approval. It also helps to reflect on the origins. Who praised you most as a child? What did they praise? Was it your kindness? Your silence? Your achievements? Did they praise your being or only your doing? Did you feel safe being messy, confused, moody, or did you learn to hide those parts? These reflections are not for blame, they are for insight. Because insight is what ends cycles. When you see where the chain began, you stop passing it on to yourself and to others. From a Buddhist lens, this is the breaking of samskara, habitual mental imprints formed by repeated thoughts and reactions. Every time you pause instead of seeking approval, you interrupt the samskara. You weaken the habit. You open a space, and in that space, something new is born. Unconditional friendliness toward yourself. This friendliness is not about liking everything, it's about not turning away. When you fall short, you stay. When you feel shame, you hold it. When you want to prove yourself, you breathe instead. You return again and again to presence. Not presence for performance, not presence to impress, just presence. Awareness that is not striving, awareness that sees, allows, includes. This is the ground of freedom, the space where the need to be perfect dissolves and only tenderness remains. As this practice deepens, life begins to shift. You may find that your sense of identity softens, that you no longer feel the need to explain yourself, that you can rest even when things are undone. You begin to live more from sincerity than from strategy. This is the essence of non-doing, a state of being that arises not from laziness, but from wisdom. Knowing that striving is not the way to wholeness. Knowing that you are not a project, you are presence itself. In this presence, you begin to unhook from outcomes. You may still receive praise, but it no longer defines you. You may still disappoint someone, but it no longer destroys you. You may still work, achieve, help, but the doing flows from joy, not fear. This is how the good kid becomes the free adult. Not by rebelling, not by becoming careless, but by meeting every inner command with awareness and choosing love over fear every time. Eventually, the nervous system begins to trust this. It learns that rest does not mean rejection, that imperfection does not lead to isolation, that love, when true, does not depend on roles or results. This trust is felt in the body, in your breath, in your belly, in your eyes softening when you look in the mirror. You no longer see someone who must perform. You see someone who is here, present, real, enough. And in that seeing, the pattern loses its power. You are no longer held together by effort. You are held by truth. The truth that your worth has never been measured by your goodness. The truth that praise may have shaped your path, but it does not define your essence. The truth that who you are when you stop trying is finally, fully free. And in this freedom, you begin to live again. Not for the smile of others, not for the gold stars or kind words, but for the quiet joy of being. This is where the journey continues and the burden finally drops. And once you begin to untangle from the pressure of praise, another layer appears, older, heavier. It doesn't speak in your tone. It feels different, sharper, sometimes louder, sometimes colder. It tells you how you should act, what you should feel, who you should be. It shows up before you make a decision. It lingers after you speak. You hear it in your inner corrections, in your guilt for resting, in your fear of letting others down. This voice is not just yours. It is borrowed, learned, carried, passed down, and you may never have noticed. This is the voice of conditioning. In Buddhist practice, we are invited to look deeply into the causes and conditions that shape our perception. Nothing arises by accident. There is no self that is separate from the influences that built it. The way we speak to ourselves was modeled before it became internal, and many of those models came from the people who raised us: parents, caregivers, teachers, elders. Not always through words, but often through tone, posture, silence, reactions, approval, withdrawal. These were the early teachers, and they left marks. Sometimes those marks looked like standards. Be useful, be quiet, be strong, don't complain, don't make a scene. Other times they show up in shame. You're too sensitive, you're selfish, you're always difficult. Over time, these messages took root, not because you believed them right away, but because they were repeated, because they came from people you depended on. And dependence, especially in childhood, makes anything feel like truth. The Buddha taught that suffering comes from mistaken identity, and one of the deepest forms of mistaken identity is taking someone else's voice and making it your own. Not through choice, but through survival. When love feels conditional, the child adjusts. It absorbs the rules, adopts the patterns, creates masks. And later, when that child grows, the voice is still there, shaping thoughts, choices, relationships. This voice doesn't always sound cruel. Sometimes it sounds responsible, disciplined, realistic, but it doesn't feel free, because it is rooted in fear. Fear of disapproval, fear of rejection, fear of being too much or not enough. These inherited voices form a mental script, one that plays quietly underneath everything you do. You may follow it without question, you may rebel against it, but still feel trapped by it. Either way, it controls the mind until it is seen clearly. Recognition is the first step. Begin to notice your tone when you make a mistake, when you are alone, when you fail to meet an internal rule. Listen. Is it your voice, or does it sound like someone else? Sometimes it comes in phrases, familiar ones. You should have known better. Why can't you just stop being dramatic? Even if the words aren't exact, the feeling is a tightening, a pressure, a need to justify yourself or fix yourself instantly. As soon as awareness lands, the pattern begins to shift, not through resistance, not through anger, but through presence. This is what mindfulness teaches us, to observe without adding more layers. When you feel the inner voice reacting, pause. Hold the reaction in gentle attention. Stay with the feeling beneath it. Often it is something young, fragile, confused, not wrong, just shaped by fear. You are not here to blame your parents or reject the past. That only strengthens the chain. You are here to see what was passed down, so you don't keep passing it forward. This is the work of healing in the Dharma, to recognize the pain that came before and to end the cycle through wisdom and compassion. Compassion means acknowledging the humanity of those who came before you. Your caregivers were not blank slates. They were carrying their own voices, their own fear, their own conditions. If they judged harshly, it's likely because they were judged harshly. If they withheld love, it's likely because they didn't receive it freely either. This does not excuse harm, but it helps release you from the illusion that it was personal, that you were broken, that you caused it. These are false beliefs that deepen suffering. And the teachings call us to end suffering by ending delusion. Delusion tells you that you are the voice, that your pain is who you are. But awareness shows you that the voice is just a habit, a conditioned sound, empty of fixed meaning. It arises, it passes, like clouds in an open sky. To undo internalized voices, you must bring in a new one, not forced, not fake, but one that speaks with kindness, one that holds you without agenda. This is not positive thinking, this is right view. Seeing clearly that the self is not a fixed object but a process. You are not stuck, you are unfolding. Try speaking gently to the part of you that feels shame. Let it hear something new, something simple. You're allowed to be here. You're allowed to feel this. You don't have to perform anymore. Say it quietly. Say it often. Not to erase the old voice, but to offer an alternative. The more this happens, the more the nervous system learns that safety is possible without perfection. That love can exist without pressure. This is what it means to take refuge, not just in teachings or rituals, but in your own awakened heart. The part of you that watches without judgment. The part of you that has never been touched by fear. That part is always here, silent, still, waiting to be remembered. As you continue, you may start to see how these voices shaped more than just thoughts. They shaped your body, your breath, your posture, the way you enter a room, the way you say sorry before speaking, the way you minimize your needs. These are physical habits of fear, and they can be softened. When you feel the urge to shrink, pause. When you feel the pressure to please, breathe. Let your body learn a new rhythm, one that doesn't react to old rules, but responds to truth. You are not here to fulfill someone else's blueprint. You are here to awaken. In this awakening, forgiveness arises, not as a duty, but as a natural result of understanding. You stop carrying blame. You stop carrying the pain of ancestors. You stop trying to fix what isn't yours. And you begin the gentle process of becoming who you are, before the voices, before the roles, before the masks. That self is not a concept. It is a presence, a quiet, steady awareness that sees all things clearly and holds them all with love. This is the liberation the Buddha spoke of, not escape from life, but freedom within it. Freedom to meet each moment with clarity, without dragging the past into the present. Freedom to feel sadness without judgment, to say no without guilt, to rest without explaining. And over time, the voices fade, not because you forced them to disappear, but because you stopped feeding them, you stopped believing them, you stopped reacting to them. They may still echo, but they no longer define you. They are sounds in the distance. You bow to them, and you continue walking. Each step is a letting go. Each breath is a new beginning. And with every pause, the space between you and the old conditioning grows. That space is peace. That peace is your nature, and it cannot be taken away. And so the old voices began to lose their hold, not by force, not by erasing history, but by meeting each inherited pattern with awareness and compassion. There was space now, space between the thought and the truth. Space between the reaction and the response. In that space, clarity grew. But clarity is not always what the mind expects. It doesn't always come with lightness. Sometimes, when the noise quiets down, what remains are the feelings you once tried to rise above. The sadness you smiled over, the anger you called unspiritual, the grief you denied in the name of peace. This is where another layer reveals itself, not through judgment this time, but through the mask of transcendence, the urge to avoid discomfort through the language of awakening, the impulse to dress wounds in spiritual words instead of healing them through presence. Spiritual bypassing often looks like progress. It looks like calm, like surrender, like wisdom. But in truth, it is avoidance wrapped in robes. It is discomfort hidden beneath ideas. It begins when pain arises and the mind quickly reaches for concepts instead of connection, when sadness is met with a quote instead of care, when anger is silenced by calling it ego, when grief is labeled as attachment and pushed aside. These are not teachings. They are defenses, soft-spoken, well-intentioned, but still rooted in fear. The Buddha never taught the dismissal of pain. He taught the understanding of it, the full knowing of suffering as the first noble truth, not to condemn it, not to romanticize it, but to face it with honesty and tenderness. Spiritual bypassing breaks this path by pretending to transcend pain without ever meeting it. It uses high ideals as armor. It replaces self-judgment with a polished self-image. Not better, just more subtle. The danger of this bypassing is that it hides behind virtue. It tells you that you should be grateful even when your heart is aching. It tells you to stay detached, even when your body is calling for connection. It tells you to let go before you've even held what needed to be felt. This creates a split, a disconnection from truth. You begin to question your emotions. You suppress parts of your experience in order to appear wise. You feel shame for not being at peace all the time, and slowly, without realizing, you replace one kind of judgment with another. This time, the voice doesn't say, "You're not good enough." It says, "You're not awakened enough. You're not peaceful enough. You're still attached." The language changes, but the pressure remains. The striving remains. The sense of failure remains. You believe you're behind on a path that was never meant to be a competition. This is suffering wearing a spiritual mask. In Buddhist practice, mindfulness means seeing clearly, and that includes seeing when the practice itself is being used to escape instead of to wake up. True practice is not about looking good. It is about being real. It meets everything with presence, especially the parts we wish to avoid. When shame is disguised as discipline, it leads to repression. When grief is covered with neutrality, it becomes frozen. When confusion is masked by certainty, it breeds rigidity. These states are not signs of spiritual weakness. They are signs of being human. The path is not about being untouched by life. It is about being fully present with it. Authentic practice does not reject emotion. It makes space for it, not to indulge it or believe every story, but to feel without fear, without narrative, without control. Emotions are not mistakes. They are messengers, temporary, flowing, pointing to needs, wounds, boundaries. When we rush to label them as obstacles, we lose the opportunity to learn from them. The idea of always being high vibration, of constantly staying positive, of never feeling reactive, these are not freedom. They are rules created by the same part of the mind that wants control. True liberation comes from letting go of that control, from allowing anger to arise, to burn cleanly, and to pass without guilt, from letting tears fall without apologizing, from knowing that suffering is not a failure of practice, it is the doorway into it. There is a difference between wisdom and bypass. Wisdom holds pain with compassion. Bypass avoids it with language. Wisdom brings clarity through feeling. Bypass brings numbness through pretense. One opens the heart, the other shuts it quietly. Many people begin to suffer more, not because they're off the path, but because they are trying so hard to appear on it. They hold themselves to a spiritual standard that excludes their actual experience. This creates distance between you and others, between you and your own body, between you and the simplicity of being. In the Dharma, the middle way is key. It avoids extremes, not clinging to emotion, not rejecting it, not falling into indulgence, not falling into suppression, just being with what is, with tenderness, with patience, letting everything arise and pass in its own time without labels. When spiritual concepts are used as shortcuts, they often lead to more suffering. Instead of saying, "I'm feeling overwhelmed," you say, "It's just my ego." Instead of saying, "I'm lonely," you say, "I should be content within." These ideas may contain truth, but when used too quickly, they prevent healing. They become tools of dismissal rather than understanding. Practice means slowing down. It means recognizing when you're bypassing and gently coming back. You don't need to be perfectly aware all the time. You don't need to be enlightened to be worthy. You are allowed to be messy, to not know, to contradict yourself, to grow slowly. This is not weakness. This is the soil of real transformation. The more you allow yourself to be real, the more peace becomes possible. Because peace does not come from avoiding difficulty. It comes from not being at war with it. The moment you stop pretending to be somewhere you're not, a great stillness opens. There is nothing to prove, no one to impress. Just this breath, just this body, just this heart, doing its best. Kindness becomes your guide, not just toward others, but toward yourself, toward the parts of you that struggle, the parts that fall into old habits, the parts that still crave approval. You meet them not with judgment, not with superiority, but with humility. Spiritual humility is knowing that awakening is not a destination. It is a continual returning, a falling and rising, an unfolding of layers you didn't know were there. And every time you drop the image and return to presence, the heart softens. You become more available, more sincere, more human. This sincerity is what others feel. It's what brings true connection, not the performance of being enlightened, but the courage to be open, to say, I'm still learning, I still feel pain, I still forget. This honesty makes space for others to do the same. It ends the cycle of comparison. It ends the race to be the most evolved. The most compassionate beings are not those who deny their humanity. They are the ones who include it, fully, tenderly, without shame. That inclusion is what ends the suffering of the divided self, the one that wants to be perfect while hiding its wounds. Healing happens when there is no more hiding. So begin here. Begin by noticing where you use spiritual language to avoid the truth, where you talk about surrender but haven't yet allowed yourself to grieve, where you repeat that you're fine, but your chest is heavy, where you say, it's all meant to be, while your body tightens. Notice, breathe, allow. Let the ideas go for a moment. Return to the experience. What is happening right now in the body? What is being pushed aside? What needs your attention, not your fixing? This is presence. And from this presence, the most profound healing unfolds. Not because you tried harder, but because you stopped escaping. You began to trust that truth is enough, and that in itself is the path. And when the need to appear healed falls away, what's left is something far more honest, an inner life that breathes on its own without needing to impress anyone. No masks, no pretending, just the truth of being human, moment by moment. But even here, where authenticity starts to grow, another pressure quietly enters, not from outside, but from within. A subtle push, a quiet sense that you still need to do more, become better, achieve peace, fast, evolve quickly, fix everything. It's gentle on the surface, but relentless underneath. This is not the voice of a parent or teacher. It doesn't sound like the past. It sounds like progress, like purpose, like growth. But it carries the same sharp edge, the same undertone of not yet good enough. This is the hidden judgment that lives inside self-improvement. The culture of self-help is full of language that promises wholeness, If you just follow the right method, read the right book, listen to the right voice, it tells you that peace is on the other side of productivity. Healing is just one more habit away, and happiness belongs to those who wake up early and never stop optimizing. But beneath that polished surface is a dangerous idea that who you are right now isn't enough. Even the desire to be better can become a form of resistance to what is. Wanting to grow is not the problem. It's the belief that you must constantly improve to be worthy that creates suffering. In Buddhist practice, we are reminded again and again that striving is not the same as liberation. The path is not about becoming something. It is about seeing clearly what already is and letting go of what is false. When self-improvement becomes a task, the mind treats your life like a project. You are no longer someone to be cared for. You become someone to be worked on. This creates separation, a split between who you are and who you think you should be. And that gap is filled with pressure, shame, and quiet despair. This kind of striving shows up everywhere. In meditation, it looks like trying to reach a perfect state instead of simply sitting with what is. In therapy, it becomes an endless loop of fixing, where no amount of insight ever feels like enough. In daily life, it becomes performance, habit stacking, routine building, chasing milestones, always looking ahead, never landing here. The irony is that this hunger for change often comes from a genuine place, a wish to feel peace, a longing to stop suffering. But when the tools meant to support you become new standards to meet, they stop being healing. They become a form of control. Control, at its root, comes from fear. Fear that if you stop pushing, everything will fall apart. Fear that if you accept yourself, you'll stop growing. Fear that if you don't keep improving, you'll be left behind. These fears are not weakness. They are wounds, and they need compassion, not more pressure. Buddhism teaches that clinging to outcomes is the root of suffering. When you attach your worth to growth, you turn freedom into another race. Every insight becomes a benchmark. Every mistake becomes a setback. Even stillness becomes a goal. But liberation does not arrive through perfection. It arrives through letting go. Letting go does not mean giving up. It means trusting that your nature is already awake, that the core of your being does not need to be built. It needs to be uncovered. Every practice, every breath, every moment of awareness is not a step forward, but a return, not toward a better version of you, but toward what is already true. When the self-improvement mindset takes over, subtle violence begins. You speak harshly to yourself in the name of accountability. You overschedule in the name of discipline. You ignore your body's signals in the name of productivity. You call it focus when it's really fear of being still. Stillness reveals what striving hides. And when you stop for long enough, you might notice the exhaustion underneath. The quiet ache of never feeling caught up. The constant evaluation of how you're doing. The inner measuring stick that keeps shifting no matter how much progress you make. These are signs that something is off, that the goal is no longer peace, but performance. Comparison thrives in this space. You begin to watch others not with curiosity, but with anxiety. Their routines, their progress, their highlights become mirrors. Not to learn, but to judge. You wonder if you're behind, if you're doing enough, if you're falling short. This comparison turns even community into competition. The Dharma reminds us that peace is not found in being ahead. Peace is found in being present, and presence cannot be measured. It cannot be evaluated. It is either here or it is not. To return to presence, you must begin by noticing the pressure. The subtle self-talk that says, "I should be more grounded by now," or "Why am I still triggered?" or "I thought I had healed this already." These thoughts seem useful, but they are judgments in disguise. They are not invitations to awareness. They are punishments dressed as discipline. Real discipline in spiritual practice is not harsh. It is rooted in care. It says, "Come back gently. Try again kindly. Stay even when it's hard." This kind of discipline creates space. It brings softness, not strain. If your growth feels like tightening, something is being held too tightly. You are not here to win at healing. You are not a project. You are a being, breathing, changing, learning, failing, returning, always returning. Not because you're behind, but because returning is the path. When you meet yourself here without needing to add or fix, something subtle opens. A trust. A quiet knowing that nothing essential is missing. That your value is not measured by your output. That your practice is not a product. That your worth is not something to be earned. From this place, the tools of self-help can be used with wisdom. They become support, not obligation. Reflection becomes insight, not self-attack. Mindfulness becomes connection, not performance. Growth becomes natural, not forced. This shift begins with small questions. Does this tool support my heart? Or does it make me feel like I need to be someone else? Does this practice open me, or does it make me feel like a failure when I miss it? Do I feel more human or more hollow the more I chase improvement? These questions are not meant to create doubt. They are meant to invite clarity. The path of awakening is not made of rigid steps. It is made of honest moments, over and over. When you begin to release the grip of perfection, you can feel again. You can rest. You can listen to your body and trust what it says. You can respond to your needs without guilt. You can stop when you're tired. You can soften when you're hurting. You begin to live, not as someone climbing, but as someone landing. Landing in the truth that every part of your journey counts. Not just the progress, not just the breakthroughs, but the confusion, the stagnation, the grief. These are not failures. They are part of the unfolding. Just like the lotus grows through mud, your clarity arises through what you once tried to escape. The teachings do not ask you to become something else. They invite you to see clearly what is already here, with warmth, with presence, with patience. That seeing is what transforms, not effort, not pressure, not achievement. You were never meant to become perfect. You were meant to remember your true nature. And as you begin to let go of the pressure to improve constantly, the nervous system starts to trust. It no longer braces, it no longer rushes, it no longer lives in evaluation. It learns to rest in experience, one moment at a time. This rest is not passive, it is not disconnection. It is a powerful returning to reality as it is. No fixing, no branding, just breath, just body, just awareness. And in that awareness, all striving falls away. All that remains is the sacred simplicity of being. Here, now, enough. And when the striving finally softens, when you stop chasing the illusion of constant growth just to feel worthy, what begins to surface is the question most people are afraid to ask. Not, how can I improve? But, why do I keep believing I need to be fixed? Beneath the routines, the goals, the affirmations, and the endless work on yourself, there is often a quiet ache. A belief that something deep within is broken. That your natural state is somehow unacceptable. That healing is a requirement for love. This belief is not obvious. It hides itself in noble language. It says, I'm just trying to be my best self. It says, I'm working on becoming more peaceful. It says, I just need to fix this one part of me, and then I'll finally be whole. But every time you act from the belief that you are not enough as you are, you strengthen the very root of suffering, self-rejection. In Buddhist teachings, suffering is not only pain, it is resistance to what is. And what most people resist is not the outside world, but their own inner experience. Emotions that feel too raw, thoughts that don't match who they want to be, habits that are slow to change. The mind tries to fix these experiences not out of clarity, but out of fear. Because deep down, there is still the belief that if you don't improve yourself fast enough, you will lose love, connection, value. This fixation on fixing becomes an identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who is always in need of work. There's always one more layer to peel, one more shadow to face, one more pattern to heal. The spiritual path becomes a treadmill, not a refuge, and each time you think you've made it, a new flaw appears. The cycle continues. What this cycle hides is a profound truth. Growth does not come from rejection. It comes from inclusion. Not from judging what is wrong, but from meeting every part of yourself with interest and care. The parts that are confused, the parts that make mistakes, the parts that still feel afraid. These are not obstacles to enlightenment. They are the very ground of practice. Trying to fix yourself reinforces the illusion of a separate, broken self that needs fixing. But the Dharma teaches that the self is not solid. It is made of conditions. It arises, changes, and dissolves, just like everything else. There is no fixed you to improve, only experiences flowing through awareness. This is why acceptance is not passivity. It is radical. It is the willingness to say, this too belongs. Even when you feel ashamed, even when you're not proud of your actions, even when you want to hide. Because rejection only deepens separation. But acceptance opens the door to transformation, not by force, but by presence. Presence heals not because it changes things, but because it allows things to be seen clearly. And when you see clearly, without the filter of judgment, you begin to understand. You see why you react, why you cling, why you fall into the same habits. Not as flaws, but as responses to pain, patterns shaped by your past, actions born from protection. This understanding gives birth to compassion, not pity, not excuses, but the deep recognition that what hurts inside you needs care, not correction. You stop being the harsh teacher and start becoming the kind witness. You hold yourself in awareness, not because you are trying to escape your pain, but because you are finally willing to feel it. This shift is what the Buddha called right view, seeing through delusion into the nature of experience. And in this view, there is no enemy inside you, no part to fix, only energy to meet, only stories to release, only suffering to cradle until it lets go. Most of the time, self-fixing is an attempt to control discomfort. The mind says, if I change this about myself, then I won't feel anxious, or sad, or angry. But emotions are not punishments. They are impermanent waves arising from causes and conditions. The more you try to remove them, the more they return. But when you allow them, fully, gently, they begin to dissolve on their own. Acceptance in this way is not giving up. It is stopping the war. It is putting down the tools you've used to reshape yourself and finally listening. It is saying, I trust that this pain is part of the path, and then walking it, not to escape it, but to understand it. When you stop trying to fix yourself, your nervous system starts to relax. The hypervigilance quiets, the inner critic softens. You no longer live in survival mode. You begin to feel safe in your own presence. This safety is not built by changing who you are. It is built by including every part of you, even the ones you were taught to hide. From this place, healing happens naturally, not through effort, but through awareness, not through strategy, but through surrender. The heart opens, not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped closing it. And this opening creates space, space to feel, space to rest, space to be without agenda, without proving, without fixing. In this space, love arises, not as a goal, but as a state. Love that is not dependent on your progress. Love that is not a reward. Love that is simply there because you are alive. This is the path of true freedom, and it does not begin with discipline. It begins with gentleness, with turning toward the parts of you that hurt and saying, you don't have to change, you only have to be seen. When the urge to fix arises, you meet it with curiosity. What part of me feels unworthy right now? What am I afraid will happen if I don't change this? What pain am I trying to avoid? These questions don't need quick answers. They are invitations to sit, to breathe, to stay. Because staying with discomfort is the way it transforms. Running from it keeps it frozen. But presence melts the ice. Even the desire to be spiritual can become a form of rejection. You want to be kind all the time, calm all the time, wise all the time. But these are not who you are. They are passing states, useful when they arise, but not something to grasp. Because when you try to be spiritual instead of being present, you are still trying to become someone, still chasing, still clinging. Buddhist teachings point again and again to non-attachment, letting go not only of things but of ideas, letting go of the story of who you think you should be, letting go of the ideal version of yourself, letting go of the goal of being whole. You are already whole, even in your confusion, even in your mess, even in your fear. That wholeness is not perfection, it is inclusion. It is the full circle of your experience held in compassion. The deepest healing comes when there is nothing left to fix, only love left to give. So the next time you hear yourself say, I need to change, pause, listen, breathe. Ask yourself, can I love this too? And if the answer is no, that's okay. Meet that no with kindness. That too is part of the path. Because acceptance is not a destination. It is a practice, over and over, breath by breath, learning to stay, learning to feel, learning to trust. And in that trust, something profound happens. You stop trying to get somewhere. You stop measuring your progress. You stop using your life as a checklist. You just live, fully, gently, presently. And that presence becomes your home, not a place to arrive at, a place to rest in, always available, always enough, always free. And when the weight of fixing begins to lift, when you start to feel the space where self-rejection used to live, something unexpected can rise in its place. A heaviness that doesn't come from striving, but from somewhere deeper. Not the pressure to improve, but the feeling that even rest, even joy, even simply being alive is too much. It shows up as guilt with no clear cause, suspicion of your own needs, doubt in your right to feel okay. This is not laziness or lack of discipline. This is pain stored for years in silence. This is trauma that went unseen. Many who carry deep self-judgment are not failing at healing. They are carrying wounds that formed before there were words. These wounds are not caused by one event. They are shaped slowly, over time, through repeated moments when safety was missing, when presence was inconsistent, when love had conditions, when emotions were too big for the room, when boundaries were blurred or ignored. This is developmental trauma, not always visible on the outside, but deeply woven into the nervous system. The effects of these early experiences shape the way a person relates to their own mind. Instead of trusting their inner world, they monitor it. Instead of feeling at home inside themselves, they remain on high alert. The body braces. The breath shortens. The heart anticipates something going wrong, not because it wants to suffer, but because it learned to prepare. This preparation becomes a habit, a constant scanning of the self. What did I say? Was that too much? Did I do something wrong? These thoughts aren't just habits of the mind. They're symptoms of a nervous system still trying to prevent what already happened. Still trying to avoid being shamed, left, punished, misunderstood. The pain of developmental trauma is not just what happened. It is the meaning created around it. The silent beliefs that say, I caused this, I should have known better, I wasn't enough. These beliefs live in the body and grow stronger each time they are repeated without being questioned. Each time the inner voice says, you're too sensitive or you should be over this by now, the old wound is reinforced. In Buddhism, the teaching of dependent origination shows that nothing arises on its own. Every effect has a cause. Every pattern has a history. The judgment you feel now is not random. It has roots, and those roots are often found in the moments when your needs were not met with care, when your tears were inconvenient, when your joy was too loud, when your quietness was misread, when you were told, through words or silence, that you were wrong for simply being. This is why self-judgment can feel so logical. Because it was taught early, not as cruelty, but as what felt normal. And the body doesn't forget. Long after the moment has passed, the tension remains. You learn to shrink your emotions, to stay small in relationships, to earn love through effort, to expect rejection even when kindness is offered. This is not self-hatred, it is self-protection. But protection built on fear can never lead to peace. To shift out of this pattern, you cannot start by forcing new thoughts. The mind cannot be convinced until the body is heard. Trauma lives in the nervous system. Healing must begin there, through gentleness, through slowing down, through learning to stay with discomfort without pushing it away. One of the most compassionate things you can do is recognize when your self-judgment is not about who you are, but about what you had to endure. You were not born distrusting yourself. You learned that somewhere along the way, and if it was learned, it can be unlearned, but not through punishment, only through presence. Presence that says, this fear makes sense. This shame has a reason. This reaction is not wrong. It's a response to pain that was never safe enough to feel fully. When the body feels truly safe, healing begins on its own. But that safety can't be forced. It comes from repeated moments of being with yourself in a new way. Not demanding, not fixing, just witnessing, holding space for the anger, the sadness, the confusion. The practice of mindfulness is not about avoiding these emotions. It's about making enough space for them to breathe, enough space for the younger parts of you to feel welcome again, the parts that were silenced, the parts that were told they were too much. They are still here. They want to be heard. Trauma can make you suspicious of your own tenderness. It can make joy feel dangerous. It can make rest feel unsafe. But you can reteach your body that these experiences are allowed, that you do not have to earn ease, that you do not have to prove your right to exist. This happens slowly, in the way you speak to yourself, in the way you sit with your own pain, in the way you stop abandoning yourself in hard moments. Each act of compassion is a signal to your nervous system that it no longer needs to protect you from yourself. In Buddhist teaching, there is no fixed identity. There is no permanent self to hate or fix. There is only process. Conditions arising and falling. Pain can be transformed not because you force it, but because you stop clinging to the story that it defines you. The story of being too much, the story of being unworthy, the story of needing to constantly be better. These are not truths. They are survival strategies from another time. They kept you safe, but they no longer serve you. You do not heal by escaping these stories. You heal by bowing to them, by listening, by asking, what are you protecting me from? What part of me felt abandoned? What part of me didn't get to speak? This inquiry is not meant to be answered quickly. It is meant to open something, a new relationship with the self, one where judgment is replaced by understanding, one where shame is softened by truth. Your body holds memories your mind can't name, but those memories do not need to be solved. They need to be felt. They need to be included. You are not broken because you react. You are not behind because you carry pain. You are human, with a history, with reasons. And when you begin to honor those reasons, you stop fighting with your own nervous system. You stop pathologizing your feelings. You start treating yourself like someone worth protecting, not from life, but from the belief that you are wrong for how life has shaped you. This shift is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is in the breath you take before reacting. It is in the pause between the trigger and the story. It is in the softness you offer yourself after a hard moment. These are not small things. They are rewiring. They are the undoing of years of fear. The mind may still whisper doubt. The old thoughts may still arise, but you no longer give them the final word. You meet them with presence. You meet them with care. You say, yes, this pain is real. And also, I am more than this pain. The more you stay, the more you trust. The more you trust, the more your body begins to rest. And in that rest, self-judgment loses its grip. because there is no longer anything to defend against. You are here, and you are enough, even with the pain, even with the scars, especially with the truth of what you've carried. This is not a weakness. This is your strength. You survived, and now you get to live differently, not by avoiding the past, but by relating to it with new eyes, with new breath, with new kindness. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. Because who you are beneath the trauma has always been whole. And now that wholeness gets to be seen, without judgment, without shame, without needing to be fixed, just as you are. And once you begin meeting your pain with gentleness, once the fear of your own reactions softens, a quieter layer starts to emerge. It doesn't come with loud thoughts. It doesn't demand attention. It lives underneath the tension, buried in stillness. A feeling that you've done something wrong, even when you haven't. A discomfort with joy. A heaviness that settles when things go well. This isn't just anxiety. This is guilt that has no clear beginning, and behind it, there is grief. Grief that never had space to be felt. Grief that had to be hidden, silenced, or turned into something else. When grief is not allowed to move through the body, it doesn't disappear. It changes form. It lingers in the background, slowly transforming into self-blame. You start to wonder if you were supposed to handle it differently. If you missed something, if it's your fault that it still hurts. And this confusion creates a cycle. The sadness returns, and instead of recognizing it for what it is, you believe it's a sign of failure. You start apologizing for your emotions. You start feeling guilty for still being affected. This is how unresolved grief turns into a lifelong guilt loop. In Buddhist understanding, pain is not wrong. Sadness is not weakness. They are natural responses to change, to loss, to impermanence. But in many early experiences, sadness is not met with presence. It's met with discomfort, with dismissal, with pressure to move on. When this happens enough times, the mind learns that grief is unacceptable, that to feel deeply is to be a burden, that to mourn is to be too much. So it adapts, it hides the sadness, it forces composure, and over time it forgets that anything was lost at all. But the body remembers. The body always remembers. Unprocessed grief gets stored in the nervous system. It colors perception. It affects energy. It influences how you relate to yourself. You might find yourself over-apologizing, avoiding rest, feeling responsible for other people's feelings. These habits are not random. They often point back to a loss that was never named, a goodbye that was never mourned, a heartbreak that had no witness. And when that sadness can't be expressed outwardly, it turns inward. The emotions don't stop existing. They become thoughts, narratives, quiet inner beliefs that say, I should have been stronger. I'm making this worse. I don't deserve to complain. These beliefs repeat themselves until they become part of your identity, not because they are true, but because they are familiar. The guilt loop is not created by what happened. It is created by what was never allowed to be felt. The sadness that stayed locked in the body begins to whisper, and when there's no safe space to hear it, it's misread as something shameful. The sadness is not shameful, but the guilt attaches to it like a shadow, and once it's there, it's hard to separate one from the other. To untangle this loop, you have to slow down enough to feel what's underneath the guilt. This is not about analyzing or solving. It's about sensing, being with the subtle weight that lives in your chest, your gut, your breath. Asking it, not with force, but with patience, what it wants to say, what has been left unspoken, what goodbye was never grieved, what hope had to be abandoned quietly. These questions don't always have answers, but they make space. And that space is what begins to break the cycle. Because guilt can't survive where grief is allowed to breathe. In Buddhist practice, we are taught to touch suffering with mindfulness, not avoidance. Not because it's pleasant, but because it's real. Reality must be met for it to be released. If sadness arises, it's not a sign of failure. It's a sign that something within you is still alive, still trying to be seen. The guilt that follows grief is often rooted in mistaken responsibility, believing you should have done more, that you didn't love enough, that you should have seen it coming. But these thoughts are not truth. They are coping. They are how the mind tries to explain pain when it has no container. The more you identify with these thoughts, the deeper the guilt becomes, and the more disconnected you feel from your own heart. This disconnection creates emotional fatigue. You might feel tired without knowing why. You might feel like you're never quite at peace. That's because the body is still holding stories that were never finished. Stories where you had to stay strong, had to move on, had to show up before you were ready. These stories don't ask to be corrected, they ask to be completed. Completion doesn't mean erasing the pain, it means allowing it to pass through fully, to cry without apologizing, to miss someone without feeling weak, to sit with the ache of something lost and not turn away. This is the healing that ends the guilt loop. Not intellectual understanding, but emotional integration. Many people try to bypass this by staying busy, by keeping the mind full. But fullness is not the same as peace. It's just another way to avoid stillness. And stillness is where grief waits. Stillness is where the unresolved parts of us live, hoping for attention. You don't need to remember every loss. You don't need to relive every wound. You just need to listen to your body when it says, something is heavy here. Something wants to be felt. And when that moment comes, be gentle. Let the tears come. Let the breath catch. Let the silence be enough. You may notice that when grief is finally allowed, guilt starts to dissolve, not all at once, but slowly, like fog clearing. Because grief, when honored, has its own intelligence. It knows how to move. It knows how to open space for healing. In this space, self-judgment loses its fuel, because judgment thrives when emotions are repressed. When sadness is welcomed, you no longer need to explain or defend it. You just feel, you just be, and being is enough. The Dharma points to impermanence as a key truth. All things arise and pass. Grief too will pass, when it is not resisted, when it is not labeled as weakness, when it is held with care. Guilt, on the other hand, lingers when emotion is denied. It is the residue of unprocessed sorrow, a mental echo of what the heart never got to release. To end the guilt loop, you don't need to become better. You need to feel more honestly, to sit in silence and say, I'm allowed to miss what I lost. I'm allowed to feel sad without fixing it. I'm allowed to let this take time. There is no schedule for grief, no formula. It moves in its own rhythm. Some days it feels like stillness. Other days it stings. But each time you return to it with tenderness, it teaches you how to be with yourself more fully. And from this fullness, guilt fades, not because you did something to erase it, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. Now you are home, with your heart, with your past, with your sorrow. And from this place, peace begins to return. Slowly, quietly, with every breath that says, I no longer need to carry this alone. And when the weight of guilt finally begins to loosen, when sadness is no longer mistaken for weakness, but seen as a form of truth, a deeper clarity begins to unfold. You begin to see that much of what you rejected in yourself didn't originate in you. It came from what others could not accept. The grief wasn't just about loss. It was also about the parts of you that had to go missing in order for you to be accepted, praised, or loved. You didn't just lose people or places. You lost access to parts of your own being. And now, in the quiet that follows feeling, those parts begin to stir. They return not with noise, but with tension, with emotion you can't name, with impulses you've learned to silence. These are not flaws. They are fragments of self that have waited patiently for you to come back. In Buddhist practice, wholeness is not about perfection. It's about inclusion. And yet, most people live in an internal split, a war between who they think they should be and who they actually are. This conflict does not always feel violent, but it creates exhaustion. It takes energy to pretend, to hold back emotion, to monitor how you speak, feel, respond, and even love. The effort to seem whole becomes the very thing that prevents wholeness. Shadow work is the path of ending that war. It is the practice of turning toward what has been pushed away, not to indulge it, not to justify it, but to understand that nothing you carry is outside the circle of your humanity. Every reaction, every pattern, every urge you're ashamed of has a story, has a root, has a cause. These parts do not ask to be praised, they ask to be known. Many of the traits you judge in yourself, anger, envy, selfishness, pride, are often just responses to earlier suppression. If you weren't allowed to say no, anger became unsafe. If you were taught to always give, the desire to receive feels selfish. If you learned that sadness caused withdrawal, you became overly cheerful. These responses kept you safe in the past, but they also buried parts of you. What's buried doesn't disappear. It becomes unconscious. It shows up in defensiveness, in projection, in overreaction. You may find yourself judging others for traits you secretly carry. This isn't hypocrisy. It's unconscious identification. Buddhism calls this ignorance, not in a moral sense, but in the sense of not seeing clearly. Shadow work invites you to see clearly, not to judge, but to understand. To begin, you must first notice what you avoid in yourself. What feelings make you uncomfortable? What traits in others trigger you most? What aspects of your identity do you hide from those closest to you? These are doors to the shadow, and when you begin to open them, it is not chaos you find, but truth. You may find that your anger protects your boundaries, that your envy reveals buried desire, that your sadness is connected to compassion, that your pride is trying to guard worthiness. None of these qualities are inherently bad. It is their repression that causes suffering. When you disown a part of yourself, it doesn't disappear. It acts out in hidden ways. It sabotages relationships. It fuels shame. It drains your energy. To integrate a disowned part, you don't need to change it. You need to turn toward it. You need to bring it into awareness with the same compassion you would offer to someone you love. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse. It means creating enough space to feel it fully, to hear what it's trying to tell you. The more you practice this, the more the inner noise quiets, because the parts of you that were pushed away don't want control. They want inclusion. When they are welcomed, they settle. The nervous system relaxes. The internal polarization begins to dissolve. In Buddhist terms, this is the middle way. Not swinging between indulgence and denial, but finding the space where both energy and stillness can coexist. Where you can hold anger without violence. Where you can allow grief without collapse. Where you can express strength without domination. Shadow work is not a one-time practice. It is an ongoing relationship, because life will continue to bring out parts of you that you weren't prepared to see. Growth doesn't mean eliminating the shadow. It means having the tools to meet it when it rises. You may feel resistance. That's part of it. The ego wants to protect the identity it has worked hard to maintain, but the Dharma teaches that identity is impermanent. The more you cling to an ideal self, the more you suffer. But when you see that the self is fluid, made of conditions, you gain freedom. You stop defending. You start exploring. You learn to speak to yourself with honesty, not sugarcoating, not attacking, just naming what is real. There is fear here. There is resentment. There is a desire I don't understand yet. These statements don't define you. They allow you to stay present. They allow the energy to move through without judgment. And when that energy moves, clarity returns. Not the kind that feels certain, but the kind that feels calm. A steady inner knowing that nothing within you is too much, that you can hold it all. This holding is not something you do alone. Part of shadow work is recognizing where community can reflect what you can't see, where safe relationships can offer mirrors, where honest conversation can dissolve shame. Isolation feeds the shadow. Connection reveals it. As you go deeper, you may notice that many of your hidden parts formed as protection. The anger that feels uncontrollable once kept you from being hurt. The stubbornness that frustrates you helped you survive. The jealousy that shames you arose when love felt scarce. These parts don't need to be erased. They need to be thanked, and then gently redirected. Integration is the path forward. Integration means you no longer push yourself into fragments. You stop trying to be only light. You become whole by holding both light and dark, not as opposites, but as aspects of a single truth. You are vast. Wholeness includes contradiction. It includes paradox. You can be strong and tender. You can feel peace and anger in the same breath. You can want connection and fear it too. These are not signs of brokenness. They are signs that you are meeting life fully. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to be pure in the way the world defines it. It invites you to be awake. And being awake means seeing everything clearly, without running, without pretending, without choosing only what feels comfortable. Your shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It shows you where love still needs to go. It shows you what parts of yourself are waiting to be included. And each time you turn toward it, each time you stay present instead of pushing away, you bring that love home. That home is not perfect. It is real. It is lived. It breathes, it breaks and rebuilds. And in every breath, you become more honest, more rooted, more at peace. Not because the war is over, but because there is no longer a war, only a return, over and over, to what has always been yours. And once the hidden parts are no longer feared, once you stop running from the traits that were once pushed into silence, you begin to feel something unfamiliar. A stillness that does not rely on control. A presence that no longer hides. But even here, where wholeness becomes possible, something subtle pulls at you. A thought, a glance, a reaction. Not about yourself directly, but about someone else. Their life, their timing, their ease, their success. You begin to measure again, not with harshness, but with comparison. And the suffering returns, disguised as evaluation. Comparison doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives as curiosity, as observation, as a quiet sense of something missing. It tells you you're doing fine, but someone else is doing better. That you've grown, but not fast enough. That your healing is real but less meaningful than theirs. And before you realize, you're no longer inside your own experience. You're standing beside it, judging it against someone else's. This isn't just a passing thought pattern. For many, it becomes an emotional dependency, a reflex used to regulate inner discomfort. The comparison gives you something to cling to, an idea of where you stand. It creates a false sense of control, even if it brings pain, because pain that feels familiar is often preferred over uncertainty. In the Buddhist view, this is another form of clinging. The mind tries to stabilize itself by attaching to ideas of better and worse, higher and lower. It wants to know where you belong, who you're ahead of, what you're missing. But this grasping at meaning through others is a kind of hunger, one that cannot be satisfied. At its root, comparison arises from disconnection. When we are not fully present with our own direct experience, we start looking outside for reference points. We ask others to silently tell us how we're doing, but they never really can. Their lives are shaped by different causes, different wounds, different timelines. The illusion of sameness is just that, an illusion. And yet, comparison continues. Because it's practiced so often, it becomes automatic. You don't even know you're doing it. You open a message, scroll a screen, hear a story, and suddenly you feel less. Or more. Either way, your mind is now somewhere else. Not here, not in truth, in fantasy, in judgment. This back and forth creates emotional exhaustion. One moment you feel proud, the next ashamed. You begin to resent people you once admired. You shrink when others shine. You overextend to keep up. You second-guess choices that once felt right. These shifts are not caused by failure, they're caused by misalignment. You are no longer centered in your own life. You are orbiting someone else's. To begin healing this, awareness must come first. Not analysis, not explanation, just a simple noticing. The moment your peace changes based on someone else's experience. That's the cue, not to shame yourself, but to return. The practice becomes recognizing comparison as a signal, a redirection, a moment to come back into presence. You don't break comparison by convincing yourself you're better. That only flips the judgment. You break it by not needing to measure at all, by realizing that your path cannot be compared because it's not repeatable. No one else has lived your life. No one else carries your exact causes and conditions. The fruit of your path is unique, and the Dharma teaches us to honor what is unique, not as special, but as real. Emotional dependency on comparison often comes from early experiences of inconsistency. If validation came from external cues, approval, grades, reactions, then the nervous system learned to scan the environment for feedback. You learned to adapt based on what others were doing, not because you lacked intelligence or willpower, but because it felt safer to mimic than to be fully seen. This habit follows you into adulthood. You judge your value by reflection. If others seem peaceful, you think you're not. If others express confidence, you question your worth. Even if you're doing well, the presence of someone doing better feels like a threat. But that threat is not real. It's a memory of a time when being enough felt conditional. To shift this pattern, the nervous system needs new information, new moments where safety does not depend on being ahead, where connection does not require comparison. This happens slowly, in small, conscious actions. When you celebrate someone's success without shrinking, when you allow your joy even when others are struggling, when you honor your own timing without apology. These choices are not about morality, they're about freedom. Each time you resist the urge to compare, you reclaim energy. You return to your life, and in that return, you build trust, not in perfection, but in presence. Buddhist practice encourages direct experience, not interpretation, not assumption, just this moment, just this breath, just this feeling as it is. Comparison lives in the mind. Presence lives in the body. The more you ground into your senses, what you see, hear, touch, the less you get pulled into mental stories. Your nervous system remembers its center. Your attention returns to what matters. This is not a one-time shift. It is a practice, because the world is full of invitations to leave yourself. Messages that say you're behind, that others are winning, that you need to prove something. But these are illusions. No one wins at being human. There is no competition in healing, no trophy for awakening. The mind creates these games and then suffers when it cannot win. Freedom begins when you stop playing. This doesn't mean you don't learn from others. It means you stop using their path as a mirror for your worth. You listen with openness, not with self-doubt. You take what resonates. You let the rest pass. And when comparison does arise, as it will, you meet it with clarity. You say, the mind is searching again. Not wrong, not shameful, just a moment of forgetting. And in that naming, you return. The return is always here. It doesn't require confidence. It doesn't need certainty. It needs willingness. The willingness to see that your life is enough. Not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. Comparison tells you that love is earned, that worth must be proven. But Dharma teaches that all beings are worthy by nature, no exception, not based on status, not based on progress, based on presence. So the next time you feel that subtle tug, the one that says, look at them, what does that mean about you? Pause, exhale, and ask a different question. What do I need right now to feel connected to myself? That question breaks the cycle, and each time you ask it, each time you follow it, you take another step out of dependency, out of mental grasping, into presence, into your body, into truth. And from that truth, comparison no longer has power. It becomes just another thought, a passing cloud, not a prison, not a guide, just something you see and let go, again and again, until your peace is no longer based on anything outside of you. Only this moment, only this life, only now. And as comparison loses its grip, as your attention begins to return to what is actually happening within you, a deeper insight quietly begins to surface. It becomes clear that the mind not only measures, but filters. That what you believe about yourself is not pure fact, but the result of years of interpretation. And if your inner world has been shaped by judgment, pressure, trauma, or unmet needs, then the lens you see yourself through has never been neutral. What you take as truth about who you are is rarely untouched by distortion. The belief in objectivity, the idea that your self-perception is accurate or fixed, is one of the most subtle traps in the inner journey. Because you don't just experience your life, you experience your story about your life, and that story has been shaped by countless conditions, both seen and unseen. You remember your past not as it happened, but as your nervous system recorded it. You assess your present through beliefs that were formed in moments of stress, abandonment, or misunderstanding. This is not a flaw in your character. It's simply how perception works. In Buddhist practice, this is called delusion, one of the three roots of suffering. Not delusion as madness, but as confusion, as misseeing. It is the belief that what arises in the mind is inherently accurate, that your thoughts about yourself are reflections of reality rather than reactions to it. But perception is shaped by karma, by conditioning, by memory, by language. It bends and filters what is seen. You never look at yourself directly. You look through the mind's history. Understanding this is not meant to cause distrust. It's meant to create space between what you believe and what actually is. If your mind tells you that you're behind, it may be repeating an old rule that someone else handed you. If your inner voice says you're not good enough, it may be echoing a standard that was never yours. What feels like truth is often just familiarity. The danger of assuming objectivity is that you begin to argue with yourself using a distorted mirror. You work endlessly to become something more, never realizing that the image you're trying to fix is already warped. And so, no amount of improvement feels satisfying. No amount of praise feels true, because the internal lens keeps returning to the same angles, the same shadows, the same assumptions. This is where practice becomes essential, not to perfect your life, but to refine your seeing. To question not just the content of thought, but the process of how thought forms. What are the voices you trust without question? Where did they come from? What emotions tend to shape your interpretation of events? How do you respond to uncertainty? These reflections begin to reveal not truth, but habit. And habit, unlike truth, can be changed. This is the path of insight, not gathering more information, but seeing clearly. When you begin to see how biased the mind can be, you stop being so quick to believe it. You learn to hold your self-judgments with a lighter touch. Instead of saying, "I'm always like this," you begin to say, "This thought is arising in this moment, shaped by past conditions." That shift changes everything. It breaks the illusion that your current emotional state defines your identity. It opens the door to curiosity. And with curiosity comes the possibility of transformation. Not because you become something new, but because you stop clinging to what was never fully true. Many people believe that they are being honest with themselves when they are being harsh. But harshness is not clarity. Clarity includes context. It recognizes the why, not just the what. If you reacted out of fear, it sees the fear. If you struggle to speak, it considers your past silence. It doesn't excuse behavior, but it understands its roots. This kind of understanding makes change possible because it is based in compassion, not judgment. The belief in objectivity also makes it harder to receive support. If you're convinced your self-view is accurate, it's easy to dismiss praise or kindness as pity or misunderstanding. You assume others don't know the real you, but often they are seeing more clearly than you can. Their perspective is less clouded by your personal history. What they see might be closer to truth than what you believe. This is why relationship can be part of the path, not just as comfort, but as mirror. When someone holds you with care, even when you don't believe you deserve it, that moment creates a crack in the lens, a space where a new story might begin, if you are willing to stay open. This willingness is the heart of Buddhist practice, not to believe everything, not to reject everything, but to stay open, to look again and again, with attention, with humility, with tenderness. Self-perception is always in flux. It shifts depending on mood, health, memory, surroundings. If you're tired, your flaws seem bigger. If you're afraid, your past looks worse. If you're lonely, your worth shrinks. These shifts do not mean the truth is changing. They mean perception is not fixed. The mind, when untrained, clings to certainty. It wants to know who you are in clear terms. Am I good or bad? Strong or weak? Healed or broken? But the Dharma teaches non-duality. You are not this or that. You are not one thing. You are a process, a stream of experience, ever unfolding. Trying to define yourself rigidly is like trying to capture water in your hand. Peace comes not from holding, but from allowing. This means learning to meet each perception as temporary. If you wake up feeling ashamed, that is not the whole of you. If you make a mistake, that is not your identity. If you forget your progress, that does not erase it. Every thought is like weather. It arrives, it moves, it passes. What remains is awareness. Awareness is your anchor. It doesn't fix the mind. It holds it, watches it, allows it. And in that space of allowing, truth reveals itself, not as a concept, but as a quiet knowing. You start to feel where perception bends. You notice when the mind tightens. You catch the moment when you begin to shrink or inflate your image, and instead of reacting, you stay. Staying is the practice, not believing, not analyzing, just staying, letting the story unfold without needing to own it. This is how you rebuild the lens, not by polishing the distortion, but by stepping behind it. And behind it, what you find is not a new identity. It is freedom from identity, the spaciousness of not needing to be seen in any particular way, the relief of not defending a version of yourself, the peace of simply being. And from this peace, your actions begin to change. Not because you're forcing them, but because they come from a place of deeper understanding. You stop reacting from fear. You stop performing for approval. You start responding with care, with patience, with truth. This is not a perfect state. It is a lived one. It doesn't mean your perception becomes flawless. It means you no longer believe it blindly. You treat it as part of the experience, not the source of your worth. And in that shift, the internal pressure lessens, the stories loosen, the fear of being misunderstood fades, because you are no longer trying to be understood through a lens that was never accurate to begin with. You are just here, awake, willing to see, willing to be seen, not through the eyes of the past, but through the stillness of now. And in that stillness, everything changes. Not because the world is different, but because you finally are. And as the lens of self-perception softens, as you begin to step back from the stories you once believed were facts, there is another pattern waiting underneath. One that doesn't live in the mind alone, but in your daily actions, your pace, your pressure, and the way you relate to time itself. It's not just what you think about yourself that creates suffering. It's what you believe you must do in order to be enough. The belief that worth is something you earn, not something you embody. That your value lives in the results you produce, the milestones you reach, the approval you gather. This is the trap of achievement, and it is one of the most accepted and praised forms of self-judgment. The achievement trap is not always loud. It often feels like focus, motivation, discipline, but underneath it holds a quiet urgency, a sense that stopping means failing, that rest is dangerous, that unless you are proving your worth in visible ways, you are wasting time. And with every unchecked item, every accomplishment, every goal met, there is only a brief relief before the next one appears. You may feel productive, even praised, but still there is no real peace, because the measuring never ends, and the self you are trying to justify never feels stable. This pattern begins early, often in childhood, when love feels linked to performance, when attention follows achievement, when you are rewarded for doing, not simply for being. And even if this wasn't intentional, the nervous system records the pattern. It remembers that praise follows progress, that presence follows excellence, that rest follows results. Slowly, doing becomes your language for belonging. And when belonging is tied to effort, you forget how to be still without guilt. In Buddhism, identity that is built around grasping is a source of dukkha, suffering that comes not from the world itself, but from the way the mind clings to it. The achievement identity is deeply tied to clinging. It holds on to the idea that you are your productivity, that success defines security, that more is always better. This is not because you are greedy or shallow. It is because the inner emptiness that comes from feeling unseen looks for something to hold. But what you hold is never enough. Not because you lack ability, but because the need behind the action was never met. You do not want trophies. You want to feel whole. You do not want praise. You want to feel worthy. But when you confuse these longings with accomplishments, you build a life on a foundation that will always feel fragile. The nervous system, driven by unhealed expectation, pushes forward in an effort to prevent shame. And when the pressure is too high, you feel anxious. When it lifts, you feel numb. There is no joy in arrival, only a quiet demand to keep going. This is why burnout is not just physical exhaustion. It is the soul's fatigue from having to prove itself again and again. To begin to unhook from this pattern, there must be a shift in how you define value. In Buddhist practice, your worth is not conditional, it is not built on roles or results. It is inherent in your awareness itself. Awareness is not something you earn, it is who you are beneath the striving. But this is difficult to accept at first, because when you've been praised for your achievements, it feels dangerous to stop. If your identity has been built on doing, then slowing down can feel like disappearing. This fear is valid. It must be met with care. Begin by noticing where your sense of self tightens, where you feel urgency, where you judge your day based on how much was done, where rest feels earned, not allowed. These are places where achievement has replaced presence, and these are the places that need the most compassion. Compassion does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means detaching identity from performance. You can still work, you can still create, but not from pressure, from clarity, from love, from a place that knows you are not doing this to become enough. You are doing this because it flows from who you already are. When the need to prove yourself ends, the quality of your actions changes. They become less frantic, less tied to outcomes, more rooted in meaning, more responsive than reactive. And when mistakes happen, you no longer collapse, because your worth is no longer tied to being flawless. This shift also changes how you relate to others. When you unhook from achievement, you stop measuring people based on their status, titles, or productivity. You begin to value presence, sincerity, kindness, silence, the traits that cannot be posted or quantified. And in doing so, you create space for connection that isn't performative. This creates an internal spaciousness. You begin to recognize that so much of what drives overachievement is fear, fear of being invisible, of being forgotten, of being replaceable. But these fears only grow when ignored, and when faced with love, they soften. The next time you feel the urge to do more to feel better, pause. Ask yourself, who am I without this task, without this goal? Without this checklist? The ego may panic, but awareness will remain, and in that awareness there is enoughness. Buddhist wisdom teaches that clinging leads to suffering, but it also teaches that release is possible, that freedom does not come from effort, but from letting go. Letting go does not mean quitting. It means disentangling your identity from outcomes. It means doing what you do with full presence, but without needing it to define you. This also means welcoming failure, not because it feels good, but because it is part of the human experience. When your identity is built on achievement, failure feels like death. But when you are grounded in presence, failure is just change. It becomes feedback, not condemnation. This unhooking takes time. It requires practice. But every time you rest without guilt, you send a signal to your nervous system that worth is not earned. Every time you say no without needing a reason, you teach your body that boundaries are safe. Every time you sit in stillness without reaching for your next task, you rebuild trust with your own being. Eventually, you no longer need to justify your existence. You simply live it. And in that living, you find something the achievement trap could never give you. Peace that does not rely on accomplishment. Joy that arises from simplicity. A sense of being that cannot be taken away by failure or loss. This is the gift of unhooking, not a smaller life, but a more honest one, not a slower mind, but a freer one, not less effort, but less fear. And in that freedom, your actions become more impactful. Not because you need them to be, but because they are no longer clouded by self-judgment. You show up as yourself, fully, openly, without apology. This is not a destination. It is a way of walking, one step at a time, one breath at a time, letting go, returning, trusting, again and again, until your life becomes not a project, but a home. And as you begin unhooking from the drive to constantly achieve, you may feel something unexpected arise, not in your thoughts, but in your body. When you stop measuring your worth through tasks, when you let go of the need to prove your value, the nervous system often responds first, not with relief, but with discomfort. Stillness can trigger unease. Rest can bring tension. You've spent years pushing through pain, tightening around pressure, carrying invisible weight. Once the striving slows, your body starts to speak. And what it says is honest. Self-judgment doesn't just live in the mind, it lives in the body. In your shoulders, your gut, your throat, your breath. It takes the form of chronic tension, shallow breathing, fatigue, nausea, tightness, or an inability to fully relax. These aren't random sensations, they're stored reactions, and if you pay attention, they often show up in the exact moments when judgment arises. You may notice your jaw clench when you criticize yourself, your belly contract when you remember a mistake, your chest close when you feel exposed. These responses are not overreactions, they are survival habits formed over time. Your body is not punishing you, it's protecting you from shame, rejection, vulnerability. The same way it once learned to brace under pressure, it now repeats those patterns even when no threat is present. In Buddhist practice, the body is not separate from awareness. The mind and body reflect each other. A thought of failure tightens the breath. A feeling of guilt weighs on the chest. A belief of not being enough sends cortisol through your bloodstream. This is the energetic imprint of judgment. These patterns become so familiar that you forget they're there. They become your baseline. And over time, this baseline becomes fatigue, chronic pain, illness, or restlessness. Not because something is wrong with your body, but because it has been carrying what the mind would not allow itself to feel. The path toward release does not begin with fixing. It begins with listening, deeply, without trying to change what you find. Bringing awareness to the body's signals is the first step in untangling the energy of judgment, not to control them, but to witness them, to feel the heat, the tightness, the buzzing, the dullness, not as enemies, but as messengers. You may start by tracking how your body responds to specific types of thoughts. When you say, "I should have done better," what changes? Does your posture collapse? Do your fists clench? Does your breath stop? These physical shifts offer insight into how the body holds internal dialogue. When you catch this, don't correct it immediately. Stay with it. Sit or lie down. Place your hands where the sensation is strongest. Breathe into it. Name it gently. Tightness, fear, shame, pressure. When you name it, you begin to create space around it. And space is what allows energy to shift. Self-judgment is rarely neutral. It always brings contraction. When your body contracts, your capacity to be present shrinks. You begin to move from reaction, not choice. You speak quickly. You disconnect from your center. You stop hearing what your body needs. This is why the energetics of judgment matter. They disconnect you from the inner guidance system that knows how to return to balance. Healing begins by restoring that connection. One way to do this is through grounding, not as a technique to escape judgment, but as a way to anchor into what's real. You might feel the soles of your feet on the floor, press your hands against your thighs, soften your jaw. Let your spine rise naturally. These simple actions return you to the present moment where the body lives, not the future where the critic projects, not the past where shame echoes. Another practice is shaking, not forcefully, but with presence. Animals shake instinctively after a threat to release excess energy. Humans have forgotten this, but the body still holds that wisdom. If you feel overwhelmed by self-judgment, stand up and shake your hands, your legs, your torso, gently, rhythmically. Let your body release what your words cannot. Sometimes the most powerful practice is allowing the body to do nothing, to lie down and be held by gravity, to surrender the effort. Let the floor support your weight. Let the muscles unclench. Let the breath find its own pace. This rest is not weakness, it is repair. Because each time judgment arises, the body prepares for danger. And if there is no moment of rest, the danger feels constant. The nervous system never resets. This is why even when your mind is quiet, your body may still feel alert. The silence after judgment needs to be filled with warmth, not more thoughts, but presence. Presence can also be supported through touch. Place a hand on your heart or your belly. Feel the warmth, not as a gesture of comfort, but as a reminder that the body is here, that it's doing its best, that it belongs. Buddhist wisdom teaches mindfulness of the body as a doorway into truth. The body does not lie. When judgment arises, the mind may spin endless stories, but the body offers a direct signal. If you follow it, it will show you what you're holding, what you've stored, what you're ready to release. Release does not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it's a deep sigh, a soft tear, a feeling of loosening in the muscles. These moments matter. They are not small. They are signs that your inner system is remembering safety. That judgment no longer needs to be the main way you relate to yourself. But for that safety to deepen, it must be practiced, not just when you're in crisis, but regularly. Moments of checking in, of asking, where am I clenching? Where am I numb? What am I not feeling? And then choosing presence instead of pressure, choosing rest instead of reaction. This choice builds trust, and trust in the body is what allows you to move through life without constant self-surveillance. You stop needing to brace for judgment. You begin to live from the inside out. The more you connect with the energetic imprint of self-judgment, the more clearly you can see its roots. You begin to notice when the tension is not yours, when it echoes a parent's tone, a teacher's expectation, a culture's demand. You can feel when your shoulders rise in defense of a voice that no longer exists. And in that moment you can say, I don't have to carry this anymore. This release doesn't erase the past, but it unhooks you from it. You begin to sense when the body is reacting to old pain and offer it a new response. Not denial, not dismissal, but awareness. A breath, a hand on the heart, a simple return to here. And from here, you start to feel what's underneath the judgment. Often it's sadness, or fear, or longing. These are not problems. They are the parts of you that have waited to be felt. And now, finally, they are being welcomed. This welcome is the true healing, not the absence of pain, but the presence of love in the face of pain, not the silence of the critic, but the steadiness of your breath through its noise, not the perfection of posture, but the softening of effort. Over time, the body begins to expect compassion, not control. It begins to move with freedom, not fear. And you start to feel that being alive in your own skin is not a battle. It's a blessing. This is not because everything is easy. It's because nothing inside you is being pushed away. And in that wholeness, you find something deeper than peace. You find your way home, to the wisdom of the body, to the safety of presence, to the soft, undeniable truth that you have always belonged here, as you are. And as the body begins to soften, as the nervous system starts to believe it is safe to release, something else often surfaces. Not fear, not even pain, but impatience. The feeling that this healing, this process, this slow unwinding should be over by now, that you should already be further along, that you should not still be triggered, tired, afraid, unsure. A quiet, constant sense that you're behind, that somehow even your healing has become something you're failing at. This is where many people get stuck, not in the wound itself, but in the judgment of how long it takes to mend. You begin to turn healing into a task, a race, a measurement of progress. You begin to feel ashamed that after all the work, the meditation, the reflection, you still struggle, you still forget, you still react. And that shame can feel deeper than the original pain. Because now you're not just hurting, you believe you shouldn't be. This belief is rarely challenged because it hides itself in the language of growth. It says, I'm just trying to do better. It says, I know I can get there. It says, if I work a little harder, I'll finally be free. But underneath, it's still the same pattern of rejection, still the same pressure, still the same voice that says you are only acceptable when you've arrived. Buddhist practice teaches that clinging to any outcome, even healing, creates suffering. Wanting to feel better is natural, but demanding that healing fit into a timeline or a method or a narrative of success becomes another layer of tension. It pulls you away from the present and back into judgment. You may believe that if you don't push, nothing will change. But true healing isn't forced. It's allowed. It unfolds when the ground is ready, not when the ego is impatient. When you look at a flower, you don't ask it why it's not blooming faster. You understand that it will open when the conditions are right. You do not blame the petals for being slow. But when it comes to your own emotional unfolding, you rush, you pressure, you scold. You take the natural pace of integration and make it into a failure to perform. This impatience often comes from fear. Fear that the pain will never end, that the struggle means you are broken, that the people around you are moving forward while you're still stuck. But none of these fears are based in truth. They are based in comparison, in expectation, in the idea that peace must look a certain way or happen within a certain frame of time. What you're calling stagnation might actually be a pause. What you're labeling as failure may be a deeper integration. Some of the most profound shifts happen quietly, slowly, under the surface. They don't look impressive. They look like rest, like silence, like moments when you do nothing except breathe through what used to break you. Forgiveness is the medicine for this impatience, not because it fixes the pace of healing, but because it dissolves the war within it. Forgiveness says, I'm allowed to be in process. I don't need to rush. I don't need to justify where I am. I don't need to reach some spiritual milestone to deserve peace. When you forgive yourself for not being fully healed, you stop turning your wounds into moral failures. You stop seeing your triggers as proof of inadequacy. You stop needing to perform enlightenment. Instead, you meet yourself with truth. You acknowledge where you still carry pain, not as a sign of defeat, but as a sign of honesty. This honesty brings relief, because the more you pretend to be further along, the more energy you spend on holding up the illusion. But when you drop the illusion, when you say, yes, I'm still learning, everything softens, the pressure lifts, the breath deepens, the heart opens. Buddhism doesn't ask you to be healed, it asks you to be aware, to stay, to witness. That is the path. That is the discipline. To not abandon yourself when the old wounds rise again, to sit with them without labeling them as regression. There is no regression. There is only returning, again and again. And in those returns, something changes. You start to notice the subtle ways you have grown, the reactions you now pause before feeding, the boundaries you didn't know you were allowed to hold, the moments when you speak with more clarity, more care, more compassion. These are not dramatic. They are foundational. But if you're only looking for grand signs of progress, you'll miss them. Healing is not a performance. It doesn't require applause. It doesn't look the same each day. It includes the days when you're tired, when you cry unexpectedly, when you forget everything you thought you learned. These moments are not setbacks. They are part of the process. They show you where your love is still needed. Self-aggression during healing often comes from the belief that pain is wrong. But in the Buddhist path, pain is part of life, not as punishment, but as a teacher. When you stop resisting its presence, you begin to learn what it came to show you. Not all pain is meant to be solved. Some is meant to be understood, included, held. And when it is held with tenderness, it changes, it softens, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly, but always in a way that leaves you more whole than before. Forgiveness also includes forgiving your strategies, the ways you coped before you knew better, the ways you numbed, distracted, overworked, isolated, avoided. Those choices were not mistakes. They were what you needed to survive. Forgiveness says, I see why you did that. I thank you for trying to protect me. And I'm ready to do it differently now. This compassion brings integration. The parts of you that felt exiled start to return. They no longer have to fight for your attention. They are seen, heard, welcomed, and in that welcome, your healing deepens. Not because you've arrived, but because you've stopped resisting the journey. You will still forget. You will still feel pain. You will still be caught off guard. But when forgiveness is present, you won't turn on yourself for these things. You'll respond with care, with patience, with the simple truth that all beings are in process. No one is ahead. No one is behind. The path is walked one step at a time, and each step is enough. This is the heart of the practice, not reaching a perfect version of yourself, but returning to presence each time you leave it. And doing so with kindness. So the next time you think, I should be over this by now, pause, breathe, place a hand on your heart, say softly, it's okay to still be here. Let that be enough. because it is. The healing you seek is not a future you. It's the you who can sit with yourself in this moment exactly as you are, with no timeline, no punishment, no pressure, just presence, just breath, just love, still here, still human, still worthy. And as forgiveness begins to settle in the body, as the urgency to be completely healed gives way to a gentler rhythm of presence, another structure begins to reveal itself. It's not loud or chaotic. It's organized, disciplined, familiar. It feels like order, but carries a heavy undertone, a sense of constant evaluation, a running commentary of what you should have done, how you should have known better, why you still haven't done enough. It shows up like a judge in a courtroom that never closes. You become both the accused and the accuser, living under the weight of your own internal prosecution. This mental courtroom isn't always obvious. It doesn't always shout. Often it speaks through subtle disapproval, through the impulse to defend yourself in conversations that haven't happened yet, through the mental rehearsing of your explanation before you've even made a mistake, through the guilt that rises after setting a boundary, even when that boundary was necessary. It is the quiet background pressure that follows your choices, constantly asking if you're sure, constantly pointing out what could have been done better. This is the role of the inner prosecutor, and for many, it's the most relentless source of suffering. The role is often inherited, sometimes modeled by a parent, teacher, or authority figure who equated love with correction. Sometimes shaped by culture, where morality and worth are confused with performance and behavior. The mind, needing order and protection, adopts this voice as a way to stay ahead of shame. It creates a system of self-monitoring, thinking it will prevent rejection. If you can catch your flaws first, maybe no one else will. If you stay on trial in your own mind, maybe you can avoid the pain of public exposure. But this system never creates freedom. It only creates tension. It trains you to anticipate wrongness, even in stillness. It makes peace feel dangerous. It replaces ease with analysis. And over time, you begin to believe that this voice is necessary, that without it, you would lose all direction, that silence means failure. In Buddhist practice, this is a misunderstanding of mindfulness. True mindfulness is not surveillance. It is presence. It watches with clarity, not criticism. It sees causes and effects, but does not label you as guilty for being human. The inner prosecutor is not mindfulness. It is fear disguised as responsibility. The danger of this role is that it turns your own mind into a place you cannot rest. Even when you are kind, it questions your motives. Even when you succeed, it reminds you of what you missed. Even when you try to relax, it says you haven't earned it. And so, the body remains tense, the breath remains shallow, the heart remains guarded. To begin transforming this inner courtroom, you must first recognize the architecture. Notice when you are building a case against yourself. Pay attention to the tone of your inner voice. Is it inquisitive or accusatory? Does it ask to understand, or does it assume you're wrong? This distinction is subtle but essential. Then, begin to question the authority of this voice. Not with aggression, but with curiosity. Who taught me that making a mistake meant I was bad? Who taught me that discomfort required punishment? Who told me that love had to be earned through perfection? These questions open the structure. They reveal the conditions that built it. And once it's visible, you can begin to change the setting. Instead of a courtroom, create a sanctuary. a space inside yourself that does not judge, but holds. A space where you are not interrogated, but welcomed. This is not fantasy. It's a shift in awareness. It is remembering that you are not your thoughts. You are the space in which thoughts arise. In this sanctuary, compassion is the judge, and compassion sees the whole story. It sees your pain and your effort, your intentions and your missteps, your fear and your longing. It does not excuse harm, but it does not confuse behavior with identity. It recognizes the complexity of being human. When the old voice arises, and it will, you meet it with a different tone. You say, "I see you. I know why you're here. But I'm not putting myself on trial today." You redirect. You soften. You breathe. This softening does not mean becoming careless. It means becoming honest. When you are not constantly defending yourself, you have space to reflect with truth. You can admit when you've caused harm without collapsing. You can feel regret without turning it into a sentence. You can grow without shame being your motivation. Over time, the body begins to trust this new approach. The nervous system no longer braces for judgment. The breath moves more freely. The muscles unclench. You begin to feel safe in your own presence. And when that safety becomes the default, the inner courtroom dissolves. It is replaced by inner refuge. This does not mean the mind never evaluates again, but evaluation is no longer punishment. It becomes discernment, a clear seeing that guides action, not a loud voice that declares you wrong. Buddhism teaches that liberation is found in the cessation of suffering, not the perfection of self. The internal courtroom sustains suffering by keeping you trapped in the belief that you must earn your way out. But there is nothing to earn. There is only to return, again and again, to the present moment, to the breath, to the awareness that does not judge. That awareness is your sanctuary. It does not speak in extremes. It does not divide the self into right and wrong. It holds every part of you in stillness. It offers rest, not reward. And it becomes louder each time you choose not to attack yourself. When you begin to live from this space, the world also changes. You judge others less. You listen more. You become less reactive, more grounded. You hold space instead of controlling it. You forgive instead of correcting, because the war within you has begun to quiet, and in that quiet, your natural compassion returns. This is how you reclaim your life, not by silencing the prosecutor with force, but by no longer believing that its voice is the truth. It is just a voice, and you are free to choose a different one. Not later, now, because freedom doesn't wait for the trial to end. It begins the moment you step out of the courtroom and into the sanctuary of your own heart, where no part of you needs to be defended, and every part is welcome to be known. And as the courtroom dissolves, as the voice of the internal prosecutor begins to quiet, there is a pause that follows. A silence that feels unfamiliar, not empty, but open. No one is assigning guilt. No one is asking for evidence. But in that openness, a question rises quietly and clearly. If there is no judgment, no punishment, and no more proving left to do, what are you actually allowed to feel? What are you truly allowed to want? And more than that, who gave you permission? For many, this is the moment of hesitation, not because they don't know how to feel, but because they don't yet believe they are allowed to. The absence of judgment doesn't automatically create freedom. It creates space. But that space must be filled with something real, something alive, and that something is self-permission. Without it, the silence of self-judgment becomes just another form of control, a quiet void with no movement. Permission is what brings color, sound, sensation, and risk back into being. It is what allows you to return to your natural rhythms, your full range of experience. Self-permission is not indulgence. It is not selfishness. It is the conscious, compassionate choice to allow what is true in you to exist, without performance, without delay, without waiting for anyone else to validate it. In Buddhist practice, this is the heart of liberation. Not chasing pleasure, but letting go of the belief that your full self must be earned. Many people wait for permission their entire lives. They wait for the right time to rest, the right amount of productivity to justify joy, the right relationship to feel seen, the right environment to express rage, the right identity to finally say yes to pleasure. They live quietly, cautiously, respectfully, contained within the borders of what they believe is acceptable. And they suffer in that confinement, often silently. This waiting is rooted in shame. Shame teaches that certain parts of you are dangerous, disruptive, unworthy of belonging. The shame may not be loud. It may show up as hesitation, politeness, chronic overthinking. But behind it is the same fear that being fully yourself will lead to disconnection, that your messiness, anger, joy, or slowness will make others turn away. So you begin to filter, to compress, to calculate how much of you can safely be seen. But what if none of those parts were problems? What if they were pieces of your vitality waiting to return? Reclaiming self-permission begins with awareness, seeing where you hesitate, where you mute yourself, where you override your instinct. It means noticing how quickly you say should when you feel a genuine want, how often you apologize before you've even done anything, how conditioned you are to ask, "Is this okay?" when you should be asking, "Is this true for me?" Self-permission is not a thought, it is a practice. It happens in the body first. It lives in the breath that says yes before the mind can say no. It is in the moment you feel anger rising and choose not to shrink. In the moment you want to do nothing and let yourself rest without guilt. In the moment you feel joy and allow yourself to feel all of it without pulling back. Each of these moments rewrites something, not because they're dramatic, but because they're real, because every time you let yourself be fully in your experience, you dissolve a little more of the conditioning that told you it was wrong to be human. One of the most powerful forms of self-permission is giving yourself space to feel messy, not just emotionally, but in how you show up. To not be polished, to not have the answers, to say the wrong thing and still be loved. This means learning how to stay with your discomfort without fixing it, to stop pretending that growth must be graceful. It means trusting that vulnerability is more healing than perfection ever will be. Messiness is not immaturity. It is what life looks like when it's lived fully, without needing to look good. Another layer of permission is in allowing anger, not to harm, but to clarify. Many people have turned anger into a shadow, something they repress or turn inward as guilt. But anger is not the enemy. Anger, in its clear form, is a signal. It shows you where your boundaries have been crossed, where your values have been dishonored, where your needs have gone unmet. When denied, it becomes bitterness. When welcomed, it becomes fuel for transformation. Giving yourself permission to feel anger doesn't mean you act on it without thought. It means you stop exiling it. You allow it to rise, to be seen, to teach. You let it move through your body without shame. You speak it when it's ready, not when it's boiling over. This changes how you relate to yourself. You are no longer suppressing fire. You are learning how to tend it. Joy also requires permission. Many people are more comfortable with suffering than they are with joy. Joy feels risky. It feels loud. It feels like an invitation for disappointment. And yet, joy is the most natural expression of a heart not being crushed under the weight of judgment. Joy does not need to be earned. It doesn't need to be proportional to your success. It doesn't need to be saved for a better time. It can live in the smallest things: a sip of tea, sunlight through a window, the sound of your own laughter. But to feel it fully, you must believe you deserve it. You must stop shrinking it. You must stop apologizing for it. Even laziness, when re-examined, can be reclaimed. What you call laziness might actually be depletion. A body asking for rest. A nervous system refusing to keep performing. A signal that you need slowness, not shame. Giving yourself permission to be still, to be non-productive, is radical in a world that equates busyness with virtue. There is a difference between choosing ease and giving up. One comes from wisdom, the other from despair. Self-permission is how you tell the difference. And then there is wildness, not recklessness, but untamed aliveness, the part of you that doesn't need approval to move, that sings, dances, cries, laughs without scripting it, that makes art that's strange, that loves in unexpected ways, that says no without justification. This part is often buried under layers of conformity, but it's not gone. It's waiting for your yes. Wildness is not chaos. It is truth without pretense. It is what rises when you stop trying to be acceptable. Buddhist teachings remind us again and again that liberation is not found in tight control. It is found in letting go of the self-image that needs to be constantly managed. That image is what keeps you contained. But when you release the grip, when you give permission instead of seeking it, you step back into the stream of direct experience. You stop thinking about how to be. You start being. This beingness is not passive. It is engaged. It says yes when it means yes. It says no with clarity. It feels and responds. It rests and plays. It listens and speaks. It makes mistakes and grows. It lives. And living without apology is one of the most powerful forms of healing there is. So, the next time you feel hesitation rising, pause. Ask, who am I waiting for? Whose approval am I still chasing? What would I do if I believed I was already allowed? Then breathe. Let the breath carry your answer. Let the body lead. Let your heart speak before your mind edits. Because permission is not something you find, it's something you reclaim. And when you do, every part of you returns home. Not because you changed, but because you stopped asking for the world to tell you it's okay to be yourself. You remembered that it already is. And when you begin to live with self-permission, when the quiet yes within becomes stronger than the conditioned no, something profound starts to shift. You begin noticing the world differently. What once seemed external starts to feel personal. not in a painful way, but in a revealing way. What triggers you in others starts to mirror something deeper within yourself, and the judgments you once believed were only about them begin to point inward, reflecting something unspoken, unseen, and asking to be understood. This is not coincidence. It is the mirror principle. The recognition that how you judge others often reveals how you still judge yourself. It's a subtle mechanism, and one that's easy to overlook. You might hear someone speak with confidence and feel irritated. You might see someone take up space and feel uncomfortable. You might witness someone's emotional vulnerability and silently label them as dramatic. In those moments, it seems like your reaction is about them, but with mindfulness, you can begin to trace the discomfort back to its true origin. Often, it lives inside you, not as the exact behavior, but as a part of yourself that was rejected long ago. Projection is not something we choose, it is a defense. The psyche, when overwhelmed by parts of itself that feel unacceptable, pushes those qualities outward. It looks for someone else to carry them. This can happen with traits, emotions, even desires. When you have learned that certain parts of you are not safe to express, those parts don't disappear. They simply relocate. You begin to see them in others and react to them as if they are foreign, even threatening. The judgment then becomes a map. Each judgment is a clue, a reflection, a reminder that something within you has not yet been fully allowed. This does not mean that every reaction is false or that behavior doesn't matter. It means that intense, emotionally charged judgments often carry personal meaning. They are rarely about the other person alone. They are an invitation to look inward. This inward looking is not about blame. It's about curiosity. It's the practice of asking, what is this reaction showing me? Where have I disowned this part of myself? How did I learn to view this trait as wrong or dangerous? These questions don't require immediate answers. They are openings, pathways into deeper understanding. For example, if you judge someone for being needy, it may be worth asking where in your life you were taught that needing others made you weak. If you judge someone for being arrogant, ask where you have been punished for your confidence. If you feel resentment towards someone's success, explore where your own sense of value has been tied to comparison. These are not easy reflections, but they are liberating. In Buddhist teachings, there is no fixed self. What you perceive is shaped by your own mind. The world you experience is filtered through your own inner landscape. When you see someone clearly, without judgment, it means you are meeting them without projecting your story onto them. But most of the time, the story is still running. The mirror is still active, and until you recognize that, you remain caught in cycles of unconscious reaction. Learning to recognize projection requires humility. It means accepting that your perception is not always clean, that what you see is not always about what is present, but about what is unresolved. This humility is not weakness, it is strength. It allows you to move through the world with more compassion, not just for others, but for yourself. Because once you realize that your judgment of others is often a reflection of your internal conflict, you stop feeding it. You stop reacting with anger and start responding with inquiry. You stop hardening and start softening, not to enable harmful behavior, but to remove the extra suffering that comes from carrying unhealed parts within you. As this practice deepens, the way you relate to others transforms. People become mirrors, not enemies. Their traits become teachings. Even difficult personalities become opportunities to see what still triggers resistance inside you. This doesn't mean you accept all behavior. It means you stay present with your reaction and use it wisely. Every time you pause and look inward instead of blaming outward, you reclaim energy. Energy that was being spent on defending an identity, on upholding a version of yourself that doesn't need to feel certain things. But in reality, those feelings already exist. They're just hidden. And when you allow them to be seen, something softens. The war quiets. You begin to forgive parts of yourself you didn't know you were still punishing. The messy parts, the jealous parts, the insecure parts. You stop needing to project them because you are learning to hold them. You stop needing others to carry your disowned traits because you are now strong enough to carry them with awareness. This inner inclusion creates external harmony, because the more whole you feel, the less reactive you are. The less you demand perfection from others, the more space you give them to be human, to be flawed, to be in process, just like you. And slowly, your relationships change. Not because other people become easier, but because your mind becomes clearer. You stop expecting others to fix your discomfort. You stop blaming them for your pain. You start seeing them as fellow travelers, each carrying their own stories, their own mirrors. Projection can never be fully erased. The mind is always filtering, but with practice, it can be seen through. It can be met with mindfulness. It can become a tool for awakening. Each time judgment arises, it becomes a doorway, a moment to pause, to reflect, to ask what it reveals, not about them, but about you. This practice is not comfortable, but it is powerful. It frees you from the grip of unconscious reaction. It liberates you from needing the world to reflect only what you find acceptable. It invites you into wholeness, not a perfect image, but a lived truth. And that truth is this: everything you judge outside you has a counterpart within you. And when you heal that inner wound, the judgment loses its sharpness. It becomes understanding. It becomes compassion. It becomes space. This is not spiritual theory. This is daily practice. One glance, one breath, one triggered reaction at a time. And in those moments of practice, the mind becomes less reactive. The heart becomes more open. The mirror becomes clearer. Not to reflect your flaws, but to help you see your wholeness, to remind you that nothing inside you is unworthy of love, and that every judgment, when met with honesty, becomes a path back home, to yourself, to others, to the freedom that was never outside you. And as the mirror begins to clear, as you stop projecting your hidden shame onto others and start seeing your own reflection with more truth, another shift becomes possible. Not dramatic, but steady. You begin to notice something else in those moments of clarity, an ache beneath the judgment. Not anger, but tenderness. Not blame, but longing. What once felt like rejection now feels like a call for care. But care doesn't just appear. It has to be practiced. Not in grand acts or rare breakthroughs, but in the tiniest moments of your day, the ones so small they often go unnoticed. These are the spaces where self-compassion is built. Self-judgment becomes habitual, not just because of past pain, but because of repetition. The tone you use with yourself, the stories you rehearse, the reactions you don't question. These form a pathway in the nervous system, a familiar route of self-criticism that becomes easier to follow with time. You don't even need to think. It becomes automatic. A quick internal tightening, a dismissal, a silent comparison, a hidden wince. To reverse this pattern, you don't need to overpower it. You need to redirect it, gently, frequently, in small, consistent moments that teach your body it is safe to be kind. These are not conceptual shifts. They are nervous system rewrites, and they happen through micro moments of compassion, brief, real, repeatable points of contact between your awareness and your humanity. These moments can be as simple as pausing when you catch yourself rushing, softening your breath when you feel triggered, noticing tension in your jaw and relaxing without judgment, replacing "I'm such an idiot" with "that was hard." These aren't affirmations designed to cover pain, they're doorways back to truth. The truth that your nervous system is not a machine. It needs gentleness, not force. The truth that the way you speak to yourself matters more than you've been taught to believe. Most people wait for the perfect time to practice compassion. They think it must come when everything is quiet, when the room is calm, when the pain has passed. But that's not where it grows. It grows when you're late and tense, when you forget something important, when you fall back into a habit you thought you'd broken. These are not failures. These are openings. Each one invites a new response. Micro moments are not passive. They require attention. You have to notice them. You have to catch the impulse to self-correct, to scold, to tighten. Then you choose to stay, just a second longer, long enough to take a breath, long enough to notice where you're hurting, long enough to say, "This is difficult, and I'm here." Buddhist teaching emphasizes the importance of mindfulness in daily life, not as escape, but as intimacy with what is real. Compassion is not separate from this. It is mindfulness with warmth. It is attention that does not analyze or fix, but simply stays. This staying builds new pathways in the nervous system. Each time you choose softness over judgment, your body learns safety. It learns that love does not have to be earned through performance or perfection. It learns that presence is enough. You may not see the effects right away, but slowly these small shifts begin to add up. You notice that you pause more often before reacting, that your breath remains longer in your belly, that your thoughts feel less sharp, that your shoulders are not always bracing. These are not just signs of healing, they are signs of trust. Trust in your ability to meet yourself without harm. One of the most powerful micro moments is naming. Naming what you feel gently without adding story. This is fear. This is tightness. This is a wave of shame. Not to dramatize, but to make space. Because when you name an experience, you place it in awareness. You stop being consumed by it. You begin to hold it instead of being held by it. You can also train compassion through self-touch, placing a hand on your chest when you feel overwhelmed, letting your palm rest on your belly when you feel anxious. These physical gestures are small, but they bypass intellectual resistance. They send signals of calm straight to the nervous system. They say, "I'm with you, you're not alone." Another way to practice is through your inner voice. Listen to how you speak to yourself when you forget something, when you disappoint yourself, when you're struggling. Then change the tone, just the tone, even if the words stay the same. Make it warmer, more understanding, like you would speak to a friend or a child. This isn't pretending. It's returning to a part of you that already knows how to be kind. You don't have to feel like you deserve compassion to practice it. The practice itself teaches you that you do. Every time you choose care over critique, you weaken the old pathways. You stop rehearsing judgment. You start building resilience, not through force, but through gentleness. This gentleness does not make you weak. It makes you grounded, because it teaches you how to stay with discomfort, with conflict, with grief. It teaches you how to feel deeply without becoming overwhelmed. It shows you that love is not a reward. It is a way of being. The most transformative moments often come in the smallest ones. The breath you choose to deepen when your heart is racing. The tension you let go of when you're tempted to collapse. The forgiveness you offer yourself when you're not as graceful as you hoped. These are the places where your nervous system relearns what safety feels like. And over time you realize that self-compassion was never about grand gestures. It was about staying with yourself, over and over, in the spaces where you once turned away. Eventually, compassion becomes the default, not because judgment disappears, but because it no longer feels safe to believe it. The body prefers warmth. The heart opens more easily when it is not being monitored. These small practices become a new language, a new rhythm, a new way of being with your own experience. Not fixing, not rushing, just allowing. And in that allowance, healing becomes a living, breathing reality, not a goal, but a relationship. One breath at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of care in the middle of everything. This is how transformation happens. Not in leaps, in micro moments. And each one matters. Every single one is a seed. And those seeds, watered with awareness and tenderness, grow into something steady and beautiful, not perfect, but real. And in that reality, you find peace, not all at once, but slowly, kindly, as you meet yourself again and again and again. And as the practice of micro moments begins to settle into your body, those tiny choices to meet yourself with care instead of criticism, what starts to become more visible is the language that shaped the judgment in the first place. It's not always the tone or even the emotion, but the structure of the words themselves, the way thoughts are built, the hidden meanings behind simple phrases, the automatic vocabulary you've learned to use when describing yourself, your emotions, and your value. Language becomes the quiet architect of your inner world, and most of the time, you don't realize it's trapping you. The words you use inside your mind and the ones you speak aloud create the frame through which you see yourself. That frame then defines what you believe is possible, what you believe is wrong with you, what you think needs fixing. The way you talk to yourself, especially when you're struggling, can either reinforce judgment or open the door to compassion. But because language is so immediate, so constant, and so normalized, it's rarely questioned. Many self-critical patterns are maintained not by strong emotion, but by habitual language. Phrases like, "I always mess things up," "I'm not the type of person who gets it right," or "I should know better by now," seem harmless at first. But each phrase reinforces a fixed identity, a version of you that is static, limited, defined by error. This internal grammar becomes a cage, and over time, it builds an unconscious narrative that feels like reality. In Buddhist philosophy, clinging to identity is one of the roots of suffering. Not because identity itself is wrong, but because the belief in a solid, unchanging self creates conflict. When you use language that constantly defines yourself in absolute terms, you freeze your experience. You stop seeing yourself as a process and start seeing yourself as a problem. That frozen image becomes harder to escape because your words keep giving it life. Self-judgment thrives in statements that collapse the moment into the self. I failed becomes, I am a failure. I'm having trouble focusing becomes, I'm so lazy. I'm feeling overwhelmed becomes, I'm a mess. These subtle shifts take temporary experiences and transform them into identity statements. And once something becomes identity, it feels permanent. It feels personal. It feels heavy. The first step in breaking free from these language traps is noticing them. Not just when they're extreme, but when they're quiet and casual, when you mutter to yourself under your breath, when you explain your behavior to others, when you reflect on your day before bed. These are the places where judgment often hides inside common phrases. I was so stupid. That was typical me. I never get it right. These statements may seem like nothing, but they shape your nervous system's sense of safety and belonging. Awareness allows for change. When you begin to observe your language as a practice, you create the opportunity to shift it, not through forced positivity or fake affirmation, but through accurate, compassionate reflection. You replace "I am so lazy" with "I'm feeling tired today." You replace "I'm not enough" with "This moment feels hard." You move from absolute identity to present moment honesty. This shift might feel small, but it's radical, because it begins to separate who you are from what you experience. And that separation is what allows healing. When the mind stops turning every struggle into a character flaw, it begins to create space for the truth. You are not your thoughts, your emotions, or your past. Changing language also involves how you speak to yourself when things go well. Self-judgment doesn't only show up in negativity, it shows up in the refusal to acknowledge your efforts. It shows up in dismissing your progress, in brushing off your strength. It was nothing. I just got lucky. It wasn't a big deal. These phrases erode your confidence. They deny you the nourishment of being seen, even by yourself. So practice claiming your growth, not as a performance, but as an honest statement. That was difficult, and I handled it. I'm proud of how I stayed grounded. I didn't know how to do this before, and now I do. These phrases rewire the brain to recognize capability, to acknowledge movement, to internalize trust. In Buddhist mindfulness, right speech is a foundational ethical practice. It includes how you speak to others, but also how you speak to yourself. Right speech is not just about avoiding harm, it's about using words to create clarity, kindness, and truth. When your self-talk aligns with right speech, it becomes a vehicle for awakening. It stops reinforcing delusion and starts pointing toward reality. Reality, in this case, is that you are constantly changing, that your value is not tied to perfection, that your mistakes are not definitions. Your language can support that truth, or it can block it. And the choice begins in every sentence you think or speak. Another powerful way to shift your language is through questioning. When you hear a judgmental phrase arise, pause. Ask, is this true? Where did I learn to speak to myself this way? Would I say this to someone I love? These questions interrupt the automatic pattern. They bring you back to awareness. They allow for something new. And in that pause, you can choose a different word, a more honest one, a more accurate one that reflects the fullness of your experience, not just the part that is hurting. You may also notice that the language you use mirrors the voices from your past. Maybe a parent's criticism, a teacher's tone, a cultural message that was repeated so often it became yours. When you recognize that your inner voice is not original, it becomes easier to question, to release, to rewrite. This rewriting is not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about returning again and again to a vocabulary that honors your humanity, that leaves space for growth, that gives you room to breathe. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. Your default language starts to change. Instead of, "I should be better," you begin to say, "I'm learning." Instead of, "I'm too much," you begin to say, "I have strong feelings, and they matter." Instead of, "I'm failing," you begin to say, "I'm finding my way through something difficult." These statements don't erase the pain, but they create safety within it. They build a foundation of trust. They remind your body and mind that you can hold your experience without collapsing under it. This is how language becomes medicine, not in the form of slogans, but in the form of presence. You are not trying to fix yourself with words. You are meeting yourself with them. You are shaping your inner world through conscious expression. And as that world begins to soften, so does your relationship with yourself. Judgment turns into understanding. Harshness gives way to tenderness. Fear loses its grip. And slowly, your words become a home you can live in, not because they're perfect, but because they're true and kind and yours. And as your language begins to shift, softening the inner dialogue that once reinforced shame and rigidity, you may start to notice something deeper beneath the words. A structure that has silently shaped your beliefs, your time, your identity. It does not always sound harsh. Often it sounds practical, responsible, even admirable. But it has trained you to evaluate your worth through output. It asks what you did today, what you accomplished, what you earned. It praises your usefulness and questions your rest. It speaks not from your heart, but from a system you never agreed to serve. This is the voice of the inner capitalist. The inner capitalist is not only about money, it is a mindset, a lens that equates productivity with morality. It measures success by visibility. It treats your body as a tool, your attention as a commodity, your value as something that must be proven over and over again. It turns the self into a product, not a living, breathing presence, but something to be polished, optimized, and sold. This internalization is rarely conscious. It begins subtly, reinforced by culture, school, work, even family. You're praised for being busy. You're admired for working through pain. You're told to keep pushing, to maximize your time, to make every moment count. These messages reward performance and punish stillness. And over time, you stop asking if they make sense. You simply follow. But in Buddhist practice, the self is not a task. It is not a resume. It is not a role to be maintained. It is an unfolding process of awareness. And awareness cannot be measured in productivity. It does not speed up for deadlines. It does not become more valuable when it is monetized. When you begin to live from awareness instead of identity, the illusion of the inner capitalist starts to fall apart. Yet it often clings tightly. It questions your worth when you rest. It calls you lazy when you say no. It tells you your value is in what you produce. Even when your body is tired, your mind echoes with, "I haven't done enough." Even when your heart needs care, it whispers, "There's more to finish." This pressure creates chronic tension, not just physically, but emotionally. You feel guilty for slowing down. You feel behind when you're present. You start to believe that healing must also be efficient, that joy must be earned, that growth should look like a checklist. But the Dharma teaches that freedom does not arrive through efficiency. It arrives through release. To dismantle the inner capitalist, you must begin by noticing its presence, not just in your work life, but in your inner life. When you wake up, what is the first question your mind asks? Is it, "How do I feel?" or "What do I need to do today?" When you rest, do you enjoy it or negotiate with it? When you do nothing, can you stay present, or do you reach for something that feels more worthwhile? These are not just habits. They are signs of internalized systems, systems that reduce your existence to production, that ask you to be constantly visible, constantly improving, constantly useful, systems that reward burnout and punish softness. But you are not a machine. You are not a brand. You are not content. You are a being with cycles, with depth, with value that cannot be packaged. Reclaiming this truth requires unlearning. It requires undoing the belief that your rest must be justified, that your worth depends on consistency, that your slowness is a flaw. It asks you to return to a rhythm that honors your nervous system, not the calendar. This unlearning happens slowly. It happens when you start setting boundaries that prioritize your well-being instead of your reputation. It happens when you stop apologizing for having needs that cannot be met by performance. It happens when you treat your time as sacred, not because it is productive, but because it is yours. You begin to shift from measuring to witnessing, from proving to being. You stop evaluating every action by its result. You stop asking yourself to meet invisible quotas. You stop thinking of your healing as a project, and in that space you rediscover what it means to be human. To be human is to be enough without earning it. To be valuable even when invisible. To be lovable even when unproductive. These are not beliefs. They are truths that have been buried under layers of social conditioning. And when you stop feeding the internal system that says you must keep up, you begin to feel what's always been underneath, aliveness without condition. This is not easy, because the inner capitalist will try to return. It will speak in moments of quiet. It will question your softness. It will urge you to monetize your joy, to optimize your relationships, to turn even your spiritual practice into performance. But you can meet it with awareness, with presence, with the quiet voice that says, "I am not a task," that says, "I do not have to earn my right to exist," that says, "My worth is not up for negotiation." This voice is not loud. It does not fight. It simply stays. It rests. It breathes. And the more you listen, the more the old system loses power. You begin to feel what's real, your breath, your senses, your connection to others. Not because you've accomplished something, but because you're alive, because you're here, because you're awake. This presence cannot be branded. It cannot be measured. It does not need to be productive to be meaningful. And the more you live from this truth, the more compassion grows. For yourself, for others. Because when you stop evaluating your own worth, you stop evaluating others in the same way. You stop asking them to perform. You stop rewarding only the visible. You begin to honor the quiet, the unseen, the simple presence of being. In this shift, there is freedom. A freedom not built on escape, but on truth. A freedom that allows you to rest without guilt, to exist without comparison, to create without pressure, to love without expectation. This is how the inner capitalist is dismantled, not through rejection, but through clarity, through the steady practice of remembering you were never meant to be a product. You were meant to be a person, a presence, a process, living not to prove your value, but to feel it, fully, unconditionally, now. And as the grip of the inner capitalist loosens, as you stop measuring your worth through tasks, roles, and output, there is a quiet space that opens. It is unfamiliar, but honest. No charts to track, no goals to meet, no scale to place yourself upon. And yet, something still resists. The question comes again. If I'm not improving, fixing, proving, achieving, then what am I? The answer, though rarely spoken aloud, is simple and radical. You are enough. Not later, not when it looks better, not once it's finished, but now, here, as you are. Enoughness is not a mood. It is not a temporary high from being praised or achieving a goal. It is a grounded state of self-recognition that says, I am whole even in process. I am not missing anything that would make me valid. I am already permitted to belong. But in a world that constantly trains us to seek the next upgrade of our bodies, our status, our healing, our self-image, this kind of being feels subversive, like letting go of an identity we've been taught to cling to. The pressure to improve never ends on its own. It reinvents itself constantly. Even healing becomes a task. Even inner peace becomes a destination. The culture around us sells the illusion that if you could just do a little more, learn more, meditate more, control more, you would finally arrive. But arrival is an illusion when you are chasing the future as a condition for self-worth. Embracing enoughness is a refusal to participate in that loop. It is not resignation. It is not lowering your standards. It is the decision to relate to yourself from dignity instead of deficiency. It is the wisdom to recognize that growth still happens, but not because you are incomplete. Growth happens because you are alive, not because you are broken. Buddhist teachings remind us that clinging is one of the root causes of suffering. The craving to be better, to become someone else, to finally be acceptable through transformation. This clinging to a future self keeps us from experiencing freedom right here. But letting go of that need does not mean you stop evolving. It means you stop punishing yourself in the process. Enoughness is the antidote to the endless effort of becoming. It interrupts the script that says you're always behind, always less, always late. It replaces comparison with contentment. It teaches the nervous system to feel safe in stillness, not just achievement. And that safety allows you to feel joy without a reason, peace without a plan, rest without guilt. Practicing enoughness starts with presence. Enoughness cannot be felt in the future. It is only accessible now. Begin by anchoring in the breath, not to fix it, but to meet it. Feel its rhythm without trying to change it. Then notice what stories arise. I should be doing more. This isn't productive. This doesn't count. These stories are not problems. They are conditioned habits. Gently acknowledge them and return to the breath, to the body, to the part of you that already is. Another practice is witnessing your daily tasks without grading them. Not everything you do has to contribute to a goal. Some things can be ordinary and still be valuable. Washing the dishes, watering a plant, sitting in silence. These actions don't need to be optimized. They are already complete in their being, just like you. Enoughness also lives in the way you speak to yourself. Language is powerful. Instead of saying, "I'll feel better once this is done," say, "This moment is already enough." Instead of saying, "I need to fix this part of me," say, "This part of me is worthy of love too." These small shifts train your inner voice to stop chasing and start witnessing. You may also find it helpful to create intentional pauses throughout the day. Not long breaks, just brief moments to ask, "Am I trying to earn my right to rest right now?" If the answer is yes, meet it with kindness. Then allow rest anyway. These pauses are not lazy. They are the foundations of liberation. Each time you rest without justification, you reclaim a piece of your own humanity. This does not mean you stop caring about change. It means you stop building your identity around what still needs work. You are not the unhealed part of your story. You are the awareness that holds it. You are not the unfinished task list. You are the being who breathes before the list begins. Enoughness does not silence effort. It purifies it. Your actions become less reactive and more responsive. You give because you want to, not because it earns approval. You show up because it matters, not because you fear being forgotten. You care for your body because it feels good, not because you believe you're not good enough until you do. The revolutionary part of enoughness is that it challenges everything you've been taught to value. It asks you to prioritize presence over productivity. It invites you to treat yourself as already sacred. This challenges the systems around you, systems that benefit when you believe you are not enough, systems that sell worth through appearance, status, speed. Living in enoughness does not make you passive. It makes you powerful. Because once you no longer need to prove your value, you are free to act from truth. Your energy is no longer wasted on performance. It becomes available for connection, for creation, for service rooted in sincerity rather than fear. This way of living is not glamorous. It often goes unseen, but it changes everything. You walk differently when you're not performing. You speak more clearly when you're not trying to impress. You rest more deeply when you're not waiting to deserve it. Enoughness also changes how you see others. You stop needing them to validate you. You stop comparing. You start seeing their worth as intrinsic too. You make space for their process. You stop competing and start relating. You stop judging and start listening. This shared recognition that we are all already enough builds a different kind of community. One where people are not products, where healing is not a race, where your worth is not conditional, where love is not a reward but a given. To live this way requires courage. The world will still whisper that you need to keep earning, that you're not quite there, that enoughness is for later. But your practice is to remember that there is no later. There is only this moment, this breath, this being. And from this being, everything begins. Not because you are fixing yourself, but because you are free. Enoughness is not a destination. It is a homecoming to your own body, to your own truth, to the life that has always been waiting for your presence, not your perfection. And each time you remember that, even for a moment, you are already living the revolution. Quiet, steady, unshakable, enough. You've made it all the way through the hidden voices, the inner courtroom, the quiet guilt, the subtle habits, the cultural noise, and the language that never quite gave you peace. You've sat with the parts of yourself you were taught to judge. You've touched grief without labeling it as failure. You've learned that healing isn't a finish line, and enoughness isn't something you earn. This wasn't just a list of teachings, it was a slow, sacred return to your breath, to your body, to the truth that you are already whole beneath the noise, that the voice of judgment is not your voice, that the need to prove is not your nature, and that softness is not weakness, it's wisdom in action. If something opened for you in this journey, speak it. Share what part landed with you in the comments. Your words might be the mirror someone else needs tonight. And if you're walking this path and want to keep walking it with us, don't forget to subscribe. One click and you'll stay connected to more teachings, more truth, and more reminders that you are not alone. Until next time, may your rest be deep, your breath steady, and your self-talk soft like compassion. You are already enough, even now, especially now. Good night.